caught up. I'll need probably half of next week, and then I'll be finally back on track.
Mm-hmm.
There's one. You can go look and see if you want me to waste time on the other side. It looks so bad.
The really crummy
It
part
feels good.
is
I'm sure it looks fine.
It looks so
my
bad.
boss knows what I do,
Is it because
but
of
she
rain?
doesn't know how
No,
to do my
it's
job.
because I'm not
Right.
used to.
She
Like I
tried.
said, I've
She's
only
like,
braided
I'm
my
so- I'm
hair
like,
for
it's
years.
okay.
Here, why don't
You
you take
know.
a picture? It'd be easier if you
Yeah.
just take a picture of my phone.
All right, let's talk about
Well,
the Salt
the-
City.
The-
Are we live?
I hope so.
Actually, it doesn't look as bad as pictures.
Yeah.
Well, I hit the go live
Actually really
button,
good.
so let's see if it actually
Yeah.
worked.
Okay.
All right, we're live.
Yeah, please do the other side.
Oh, okay, you do want it done?
Is that better? Shut up.
Means we better talk about topical things now, ladies
I
and
don't know how to do
gentlemen.
that, but good luck.
I know that
Oh,
we're not any
topical
good at
creeps?
that, but yeah.
The New York Thruway.
While we're waiting for people to file in, and in order to save a few minutes of time, why don't we do something a little bit different and talk about announcements while people are filing into the
Oh,
show?
announcements.
Pretty straightforward. Well, let me introduce who is here tonight. I've got yours truly, your host. You've got Douglas is here for the first time this season. Hi,
and I
Doug.
am no stranger to tonight's subject matter. I actually went to college near Syracuse, New York, and I have family that lives in the area. I am supposed to be in Syracuse tomorrow, actually.
There you go. Yeah.
Right.
I was supposed to be there tonight, but I'm here instead.
See, Doug knows who the cool people are, and he knows who they really hang out with.
I'm
So, thank you for being
skipping
here.
a hockey game for this.
Well,
Okay.
this will be more entertaining, I can assure you. Absolutely.
You know how much I like hockey, though.
Do we? There's a whole slide almost devoted to hockey coming up here. We have Corco here from CorcoHighways.org. Thank you. Making his debut appearance. Bill is here for the first time this season.
No, second.
When were you here last? Were you here last week? Or 2 weeks ago? No, you couldn't have been here 2 weeks ago.
No, I stand corrected. I was here recently, but that was technically last season. My apologies.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember when you were here last, but okay. We're good.
It was sometime not that past.
We've got Erica here from New Jersey. Hi, Erica. How are you?
Hello.
You look a little occupied right now.
I can talk and braid. It's okay.
That's fine. That's all right. And what, you again?
Me again.
You're like on every week now. What's going on?
I
here?
am, and I have some news. I have been recently crowned Miss Bury the Interstate 2022.
Hooray!
And I have Little Miss Bury the Interstate 2022 next to me.
She's gonna be Miss Bury the Interstate 2042.
And we have a bunch of deer looking at us.
Yeah, we've got a whole
yes.
Dear.
a whole herd of little deer watching us too. Maybe I'll post a picture of that later. Doug, you're here for the first time in a while. Why don't you talk about what's going on with Gribble Nation?
Gribble Nation, a couple days ago, I uploaded a article on the Whiteface Mountain Veterans Memorial Highway in the Adirondacks. And actually found a video of yours, which I embedded into the article.
Yeah, that's probably the last time I was on that road, and it was about 10 years ago.
Yeah. I could have picked a better weather day. It was very cloudy, but it's a very nice drive, and I recommend you seeing that. Other things I've been doing, just a couple of covered bridge articles recently. Also was when I went to Virginia last month, I drove the White Top Mountain Road, which is the second highest mountain in Virginia or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also the highest elevation you can get in Virginia, and that's a
Really?
road and it's a great view from the top. So I actually wrote an article about that as well.
Okay.
So the theme so far this winter is covered bridges in New Brunswick, the province.
Yes, not New Brunswick,
and,
New Jersey. Yeah.
And mountain roads.
Canada.
Oh, that's not. Those aren't bad subjects to talk about. Yeah. On the YouTube front, for me, continuing with I-35 in Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, Kansas, and Oklahoma. I've got a couple more days of that still to go. And after that, I'm moving on to the Tulsa metro area, where we'll be into the first week of the new year. So that's what's coming up next. So that'll get you through Christmas and New Year's and into January. There will be videos every day for the Tulsa side of Oklahoma.
All right.
I think we can start now, right?
Yeah.
Well, good evening, everybody. In case you're just joining us, welcome to tonight's show. We're talking about Syracuse, New York. We've got a lot to get through this evening, which is why we kind of started right on time this time around. We're going to talk about the city in general, the freeway system, and also one of the more hotbed topics in all of road enthusiasm these days, which is the community grid proposal for downtown Syracuse. And we will talk about that before the night is up. But before we get to that, let's talk about Syracuse in general. You see some of the statistics on your screen here. Really born out of being a hub for transportation. The Erie Canal was built in 1825. The original canal went right through downtown Syracuse.
Yeah,
up
Clinton
until
Square
is
downtown Syracuse, and that's where they have their big tree, Christmas tree, and their ice skating rink, and that's where the canal used to go through.
I do have pictures of that coming up, but you're right.
Yeah.
In the years since the deindustrialization of upstate New York, Syracuse University has kind of become the central or the main employer of the city.
SUNY Upstate Medical Center.
Yeah, that's a big one. Yeah, I think there's a lot of construction going on there right now.
Yeah, my brother actually works for them, and he has to deal with the construction when he's in there. Fun fact. The Syracuse University about 100 years ago actually sold the medical center to the state, and that's why they can't get AAU status.
Yeah, I don't know what that is, but okay.
It's basically they can't join the Big Ten.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they don't have a medical center.
Oh, shucks! They can't get that $100 million check every year.
Right.
They gave it to Rutgers instead.
Yeah. Syracuse, I think, would have been.
Clearly, Rutgers is just a better school.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Syracuse University, they are kind of front and center as far as the athletic scene in town. The Syracuse men's basketball team is coached by Jim Boeheim, who's in his 46th season. They won the national championship in 2003 thanks to a freshman named Carmelo Anthony, who went on to have a pretty good NBA career himself.
I think Jim Boeheim's the only NCAA head coach to win 1,000 games twice.
Oh, right, because he was over 1,000, and then because
they took 101 wins away from him
because of whatever violations of NCAA policy, and then he ended up passing 1,000 again recently, right? Yeah. It's like, I'm gonna be over 1,000 wins no matter what you guys do. Well, that's. Do we want to?
That was an accident, but he did.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's true. Hockey, Doug. What do you want to say about the Syracuse Crunch?
I was supposed to go to Syracuse Crunch game tonight.
Yeah, but
I will say other things. They're the AHL affiliate of the Tampa Bay Lightning.
Yeah.
And the thing is, the highest attended American Hockey League game was between the Syracuse Crunch and, you'll see on the screen, the Utica Comets. They had a game, it's about 10 years ago, at what was then the Carrier Dome.
I think people still call it the Carrier Dome.
I still call it the Carrier Dome.
Yeah.
And they had about 30,000 fans for this hockey game. They had a college game beforehand. Syracuse University, the women have a hockey team. The men don't. So what they did, they invited Utica College and SUNY Oswego to play in the college game before that. So I got to see my alma mater play in the Carrier Dome for probably the only time ever.
That's not bad though.
That's cool.
Yeah, so we talked about the Syracuse men, we talked about the Crunch. The Utica Comets are the AHL affiliate nowadays for the New Jersey Devils.
They used to be Vancouver.
They used to be up until 2021. Yeah.
I'd also like to throw another thing out about Syracuse University. Their men's soccer team just won their first national championship.
All right, very nice.
Maybe the women's team. One of their soccer teams just won the championship.
And then the other team we should mention is the Syracuse Mets.
Yep, which for years was like the Syracuse Chiefs.
Yeah.
But then the Mets actually bought the franchise and renamed them the Mets.
Because they were affiliated with the Nationals when I was in
and
school.
before the Nationals,
Yeah.
for years, they were affiliated with the Toronto Blue Jays.
Oh, okay. Well, that,
And
yeah, I can
like,
see that.
A couple times this season, they rechristened themselves as like the Salt City Mets or something like that, or Salt City Potato Spuds. Syracuse's their nickname is the Salt City because there's a lot of salt mines in the area,
Yeah.
and you'll find that reflected in some of their food, like the salt potatoes.
Mm-hmm.
Ah,
And but it doesn't beat the Utica cuisine of chicken riggies, Utica greens, and and cookies.
That's right. Yeah. Everyone knows the Utica is better. Yeah.
For food, it is.
Well,
yeah.
for food anyway, yeah. I want to talk for a minute about the dome. It was built in 1980 as the Carrier Dome, and I think that most people in Syracuse still call it that. Its name now is the JMA Wireless Dome, which I actually had no idea was their new name until I was in town recently.
I had no idea that JMA Wireless was a thing.
Well, neither did I. I'm like, what the hell is this?
Like, what did they do?
Yeah. But the dome was
Get a
built.
well-rounded education.
Yeah, but the dome was built in the late 70s, early 80s, and Carrier had the naming rights to it from the start because they gave a $2.75 million grant to the university to help fund its construction.
oh wow.
And they also had a much bigger presence in the area as well.
Yeah, they did. Yep. Originally, so the roof design of this thing has changed recently. Originally, it was an inflatable roof. It weighed 220 tons. It was supported by 16 5-foot diameter fans, each capable of generating 95,000 cubic feet of air movement per minute. And that is what kept the roof inflated and,
Like the old
you know.
Metrodome?
Well, so the Metrodome fiasco kind of, I think, freaked people out a bit. And so they were like, well, we need to do something about this roof. Even though, theoretically, you know, snow never really accumulated on the roof during storms, like, there was still just enough, you know, outcry that, you know, it's an old technology that really shouldn't be allowed to be in use for a large public building like this. So so they came up with a redesign feature that really didn't change the building all that much. It introduced this truss work that you see on the top. And I'll just leave it on that slide for a second. The renovation was announced in 2018. It cost about $118 million and was completed this year in 2022. The original air-supported roof was replaced with a fixed roof supported by the truss work that you see around the perimeter, and also the new roof is attached to that truss work with cabling. So it's meant to be, you know, a fixed, permanent thing that doesn't require air pressure to be kept aloft. Also, it's worth noting that actually the inside of the dome has been brighter since the roof was replaced because parts of the roof are now translucent. So it's actually a bit less dank and depressing inside.
Yeah,
there
I've
now.
been to the dome, which is sometimes let's call it the dome there.
Yeah.
Couple times, and I just remember
Just
being
call it the
kind of
dome. You'll never have to worry
a
about.
dark-
Yeah.
a dark place.
Yeah. Here's the ballpark where the Mets play. It's on the north side of town, near where the current Amtrak station is.
Yeah, and we're near the mall,
Yeah, the mall.
which
So,
I keep on wanting to call it Carousel Center, but
well, that's another one that changed its name recently, right?
Yeah.
Because I always knew it as Carousel Center, and
Yeah.
but we'll talk about that in a second. I think this is what you were talking about
Clinton
a moment
Square,
ago,
yeah.
right? With Clinton Square. Remember this view in the top left, because this is what it looks like today, and we're looking eastward down what's now called Erie Boulevard. The original 1825 canal passed through downtown Syracuse along this street that, you know, gets its name because that's where the canal used to be. And along this street, you'll see historic markers and stuff like that, like the one in the lower right, which I think is kind of cool. How there was actually an aqueduct collapse at the west end of downtown. One day in the early 1900s.
There's still a couple of old bridges that are built in, like, I think from the canal or related to the canal that are
Yeah,
still
there's
kind of in use.
So there's one like where that historic marker is that I got a picture of. That Erie Boulevard crosses over a stream on an original 1825
Yeah.
aqueduct bridge.
I have
Yeah.
pictures of it
Yeah.
floating at home
Yeah.
somewhere.
Yeah, so this is, I mean, if you see, this is what it looked like roughly 150 years ago or whatever. But, yeah, the main line of the canal came right through town here. Kind of interesting how Syracuse was kind of ground zero for the canal when it was built, and then the railroads replaced the canal as the main mode of transport. And then, as we'll talk about in a few minutes, the interstate system more or less sits in this very spot today.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see how, Syracuse was kind of an example of how transportation has evolved the last 150, 200 years or whatever. No visit to Syracuse would be complete if you're into barbecue without a visit to the original Dinosaur Barbecue, which is on the west side of downtown.
I've been there a few times. And if there's another barbecue place, I think one of the chefs from Dinosaur, basically parted ways and opened up local barbecue restaurants called Limp Lizard.
Yeah, there you go.
There's one in downtown Liverpool.
That's
Okay.
nice.
But other things in Syracuse, I was mentioning with the salt potatoes, you also have another Syracuse institution, Hyde's Hot Dogs, which is actually in Liverpool. And they probably get their hot dogs from Hoffman Hot Dogs, which at least in Syracuse is the local hot dog.
I see.
Like Rochester has Wiggles and Buffalo's has Salins.
Did you want to say anything now about the New York State Fair?
Oh yes.
Do you want to get that out of the way now?
Yeah. With the fair.
You don't really want to talk about Destiny USA.
I
Do you?
actually do want to talk about that too.
Well,
And this will kind of play in with how things have my.
it's up to you
opinions
if you
on
want to do it now or save it.
Yep.
I don't
So the fairgrounds, that's basically that's where the New York State Fair is. I go there once a year. I do enjoy my fair food. The thing with the fair is, and I'm not sure if this is going to be mentioned in one of the 690 slides, but until like the past couple years, there was a traffic light for 690 that was in use only during the fair season, so people could basically find their parking or what have you.
Cool.
Yeah.
As for
Parking lot,
Destiny
yeah.
USA, used to be known as Carousel Center, and you might hear me call it Carousel Center. When I went to college in the area, this is going back a little over 20 years now, this was when they first were like, oh, we're really going to expand the mall. And some of the plans were to have like a Mediterranean village in the mall, for instance.
Yeah, there was supposed to be a whole lot more development here than what actually got built.
Yeah.
And then the mall was kind of the only thing that happened.
Yep, and the thing is, like when I was at school, there were people like, oh, so we want to stay in the area, but like they want to just expand this mall. What are we going to do?
Yeah.
So people, at least when I was going to school, were not too enthused by that. But the thing with Carousel, it replaced a area which I think was known as like Tank City. There's like a lot of like oil tanks in the area. So it looks nicer. Oh, and apparently it's been sitting on sinking land.
Oh, nice.
That's fun.
Yeah, we kind of have that problem down here with the Palisades Center.
Yeah.
So what is it about shopping malls sinking these days? I don't know what's
Probably
going
just
on.
because that's where they had the real estate, I guess.
And they're
Yeah,
so big
well.
that they take up so much land, it's bound to sink somewhere.
Oh, and
Yeah.
I saw the slide for Onondaga Lake, which apparently
Yeah,
was
so this is
one
Onondaga
of
Lake
the
here.
very Syracuse. I feel can capitalize a lot on basically having that lake right in town. But it's actually, I think they've been doing some cleaning up for it, but it's one of the most polluted lakes in the country because,
Yeah,
like Honeywell and GE thought it was a good idea to dump stuff in the lake.
it was basically their storm sewer or whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I still don't want to set foot in the lake, but I did see the world's biggest rubber duck in the lake.
But you know what though, it
That's
has
so cool. I wanted to see
it's actually a lot better than it was.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's still got a long way to go, but it's nice to see that they're finally making some headway and making this actually an attractive recreational spot finally.
Yeah.
By the way, see, here's the Goodyear blimp up here. So I was in town the weekend that Syracuse was playing Notre Dame in football.
Did you get to go to the game?
I did not go to the game.
Yes.
The reason why I knew it was a blowout was that I arrived on the campus to photograph the Carrier Dome, and it was like, I think kickoff was at like 12, and it was like 1 o'clock, and there was a steady stream of Syracuse people walking out of the building already.
Yeah.
So I checked my phone, and I'm like, oh, it's like 35-0 or whatever. I'm like, all right, well that explains it. Yeah. So. But I got to photograph the Goodyear blimp, too, while I was in town. This, historically, has been one of my favorite views of the city. It's on 81 northbound as you're passing by the Onondaga Nation, as you're approaching town from the south. This has always been my favorite view of the city. It's the one that I knew the best when I was a kid. I didn't discover the other ones until very recently. Maps? I don't know, what do we want to say about maps? This kind of shows the progression of things. The thing I like about the map on the left is that you see the original designation of the outer loop as I-281. Well, part of the outer loop was 281, and then the northern part of it was 481. But we'll talk about that in a few
And
minutes.
historically, some of the other proposals where they were going to have a loop basically in the southwest side of the city. That was one, which I think was kind of dead in the water pretty quickly because land, at least southwest of town, is a lot hillier.
Yeah.
And another one you kind of see going like from like around exit 39 of Thruway to the northeast. That's John Glenn Boulevard.
Yeah, that's up here.
That kind of just ends at nowhere, but it was supposed to go up to New York Route 41. So that I think would have made a nice, it's an arterial road. That would have made a nice like northwestern loop in the area, which
that would have been useful.
I think that would have been very useful because if you're trying to get from like Liverpool, North Syracuse, from that side over town of Clay, you do have to basically drive just a lot of like local roads.
Yeah.
Why did I-281 change to 481?
So originally they were, well, we'll talk about this, I think, in a little bit, but they were originally envisioned as two different designations once upon a time, yeah. So that's the genesis of that. In the 80s, this is kind of what the scene looked like. The original quote-unquote 481 was actually the last piece to be built, as you see here.
Yeah.
And then the system, more or less today, is on your right. Here is the Google Maps perspective of the full system. You see 90 and 81 are the mainline interstates. 481 and 690 are your auxiliaries, and there are a few state highways thrown in there as well, which we will talk about starting momentarily after I tell you about an honorable mention that I would like to throw in here, and that is the Carrier Circle, which is located in East Syracuse. It's where, if you get off the Thruway at exit 35, the ramps dump you into this big traffic circle here, where Thompson Road meets routes 298 and 635 at the north edge of the Carrier complex. What's interesting about this circle is that, as you see in the picture in the upper left, all of the exit points from the circle are sequentially exited.
I think there's like
numbers.
5 exit numbers.
Yeah, it's a 5 points. Yeah. So, exits 1 through 5, and you have standard freeway exit signs in this circle. So it's a little bit of an unusual presentation, but it works. So if you're ever in the area, that might be something worth grabbing a photo or two of. All right, let's get down to business here. Thruway. Thruway is interesting because normally when you drive it, the exits are several miles apart, 10 to 15 miles apart usually. However, in Syracuse, exceptions were made mainly to please the local industries.
Yeah.
Exit 35, for instance, was put through because they wanted to serve Carrier. Yep. And exit 37, which is just west of I-81, was built to mainly serve Lockheed Martin and their complex.
And exit 38, they're building. They're supposed to be building a big Amazon distribution center.
Is that a new development?
New development, yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah,
They need
I guess
to
it wouldn't be
fix
50 years old.
They need
but
to fix
yeah.
the overpass there because that's kind of ruddy. But yeah, my brother complains about it all the time.
Well, yeah, when I was through there recently, and they were working, I think, on that new interchange there, and the new overpass there.
Yeah.
There was one of those overpasses. It might have been that one that I remember going by and like, why the hell is this still standing? Like it looks it's so corroded and all that nonsense. But yeah, that there are a few bridges along the Thruway that got to be torn down and rebuilt, and that was one of them. There's no real place to put the next two auxiliary routes we're going to talk about, in any other city, so we're going to cover them here. The first of them is 790 in Utica, which I know is a very favorite highway in road enthusiasm. It's a very weird highway. The terminus in downtown Utica is straightforward enough, but there's always been debate as to what the other terminus is. I don't know, maybe you want to take a stab at that.
My understanding is that basically if you drive like on the Thruway through Utica, you'll see like a parallel throughway on each side, like kind of like a frontage road, but it's actually freeway. Like east of 8 and 12, that's the east part of 790, and that basically kind of parallels the throughway, and then it goes down 5, 8, and 12.
Yeah.
But 790, I'd say, basically ends at the ramp for the Thruway exit 31.
Yeah, so a few lines here. 1961 was when they really got construction going in earnest between Thruway exit 31 and downtown. It was originally a Super 2, and then that linked into the north-south arterial. Let's see, that was complete by 1965. The connector was rebuilt as a 4-lane freeway that basically was a frontage road to the Thruway. And it was at that time, so originally 790 did dump in directly to exit 31, but then when they rebuilt the interchanges, that direct connection was lost, at least for coming off of 90.
Yeah, because going like west on 790 from the Thruway, you kind of got to go on to North Genesee Street and then 5, and then that basically turn over around near the Price Chopper there.
So I think that's where the ambiguity started, because back then it was pretty straightforward. It fed directly into the Thruway ramps, but that doesn't really happen anymore. So now there's a bit of confusion about what exactly happens to 790 at the east end, which, as we've said, it's not exactly black and white. But that's what makes it so interesting to talk about, right?
Yeah.
If it was just your ordinary interstate that had an ordinary ending, I don't think we would talk about 790 at all. It would be like, whatever, it's here, whatever. But it's like, everybody's like, where does it end? Like, Yeah. We do know where 781 ends conclusively, I think.
Do you know where it starts?
I think we do. Yeah. So 781 connects I-81 north of Watertown with the main gate to Fort Drum military base. And if we had more time, I would tell you about my dad and his experience dealing with people at Fort Drum lately. It's actually kind of cool. Because he works at West Point now. Yeah. And they're building the new water treatment facility. Yeah. And the people at Fort Drum are involved in a peripheral way, but I won't get into too much of that stuff right now. But it's actually really cool stuff that's going on. So Fort Drum wanted a direct connection to the interstate system for a number of years. And so the DOT, realizing that they could also connect to US 11 north of town more directly, said, all right, fine, we'll build this connector. It was built, it's the most recent addition to the New York State Auxiliary Interstate Canon. It was opened in 2012. Yeah. One of the things that came up during the design of this highway was that a species of bat, which happens to be endangered, known as Indiana bats, live in the area.
I hate those bats.
They live in the area, and they, I guess they mate or whatever in that proposed right of way. As a result, several concessions were made, including clearing of trees during certain months of the year while the bats were hibernating in caves. And also this resulted in a somewhat narrower right-of-way than what they were originally planning to do, which meant less destruction of trees and forests and stuff like that.
And bats.
Which is why Bruce Wayne loves this highway. You know, cue the music. Yeah.
Interstate.
Yeah, that's right.
Freeway.
Nice.
Every once in a while, you might hear conversation in the road enthusiast community about a interstate standard highway that would connect I-81 across the North Country of New York State with I-87 near Plattsburgh. Sometimes this road has been referred to as the rooftop highway. Some people have gone so far as to label it as potential I-98. Either way, this is something that I think has more legs in the AARoads forum than it does on the DOT.
Yeah, and
plan
they've talked
books.
about it in like local, like around the North Country, New York. I don't think you'll ever see an I-98 or rooftop highway,
Yeah.
but I always thought that it might not be a bad idea to sink a few bypasses around some of the towns along 11.
Yeah. Then
That's pretty much what
Yeah,
it is, because
that's-
between like the towns, it's not that busy.
Alright.
yeah. That's what you're more likely to see in the next 20 to 30 years. Is bypasses of the more populated communities.
Because if you look at New York State Route 37, which goes along St. Lawrence there, so like Ogdensburg and Messina, they have bypasses around
Yeah.
like Ogdensburg and what have you.
Yeah. 690. It passes through downtown on the east-west axis. We were talking before about the Erie Canal and how the canal was replaced by the railroad. Well, the railroad that came through to replace it was the New York Central. And that got replaced in the 1960s by the interstate. And in fact, in some cases, quite literally. As you pass through downtown, parts of 690 were built on the old embankment that once carried the New York Central Railroad. And if I skip ahead to this slide, you'll see kind of what I'm talking about. That is a real train platform in the bottom right corner.
Huh.
And they have fake people on it.
Yeah, there's fake people, and apparently, yeah, they dress them up too.
Yeah,
Great.
that's-
I like the
kind of like the mannequin that's on the road going up to my cabin.
Oh,
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah,
That's true.
You know, if you go up the road from Charlottesville, there's someone for their house has this creepy mannequin. They dress them up for the different holidays.
so that's kinda
Yeah, so the station was basically right where they put the freeway. Ultimately, the old station building still remains. A remnant of this building was repurposed for Time Warner Cable.
Yeah,
It's the base of its Central New York operations, and also the home of Spectrum News 1 Central New York.
nice.
They operate out of that building
See a
now.
giant satellite dish on the roof that I don't think's original.
I don't think that goes back to the early 1900s. I would agree.
Froggy's wife used to work there
Oh, really?
Really?
I didn't know that. Okay.
years ago.
Yeah. Cool, all right. 690's construction began in the early 60s. It was envisioned as an east-west freeway along the west shore of Onondaga Lake. It basically was built to replace and supplant the old State Fair Boulevard as the primary highway through the area. In some cases around Onondaga Lake, State Fair Boulevard was upgraded in place into the interstate that we see today.
Yeah.
Let me see, what else should I mention here?
There was a proposal that it was supposed to be built out to Chittenango.
Oh yeah, we can talk about that.
Yeah. And that was I think like one of the later proposals, and I think it was not going to be necessarily part of like I-690, but they were looking at building like a 4-lane road out to Chittenango. It's recently as the 80s.
Did they have it? Was it going to be a freeway the whole way, or were they looking at arterial divided highway
My
options?
understanding
Or?
it was an arterial. I'd have to
Okay.
look through
Yeah,
my notes, which are not here.
yeah. So obviously it wouldn't be a continuation of the interstate, but it might have had it might have been New York 290 or a relocation of that, because
Yeah.
New York, the real New York 290 passes somewhere near there, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah, so that would have been a logical.
just
relocation.
just north of there. Yeah.
And it's an X90 state highway, so in New York State that actually means something. You know, as far as relativity to the actual interstate system.
Yeah.
The New York 690 is the spur that goes up to Baldwinsville.
Yeah.
From the Thruway exit 39 interchange there.
And then, basically north of Baldwinsville, it's part of Route 48, which take up to Fulton, Oswego.
Yeah, that's another useful.
I've actually found
component
that,
there, yeah.
like, going between Syracuse and Oswego, 48 and 690 probably works better than 41.
Really, you think so?
Yeah.
Is that because it's just not as traveled as the
Yeah.
other one? Yeah. Here's the aerial view of the east end of 690 where it meets 481, and you will see that there are, yes indeed, some ghost ramps involved.
Oh, yeah.
And they did account for a potential easterly continuation of this highway towards Chenango. Part of the right-of-way is currently used by a DOT maintenance facility, which you
Yeah.
can see right about here.
Yeah, and
Yep.
if you look from Butternut Drive, you can actually see in the distance some of the ghost ramps.
Ghost ramps
Or like ghost ramps in some of the, basically the parts of the interchange that are, not in use, or
yeah.
some of the, you can
Yeah, I
actually
didn't.
kind of look from there.
Yeah, I didn't actually do that. But apparently, the DOT doesn't want to get rid of them because they're very easy access to the highway,
Yeah.
and they're decently maintained enough. And it's like, all right, well, we'll just keep them here as long as the
And
maintenance facility.
We know
is...
about snow in Syracuse. So.
Well, yeah. So they need all the access they can get at times. Yeah. Here's a couple pictures of the New York 690, which is also known as the Baldwinsville bypass. It's there. It's whatever. It's not. If you want to clinch New York State highways, it's one of the easier ones to get. I would say. The 5. So New York Route 5 runs more or less east to west across the whole state between Pennsylvania and Albany. Yeah. In the Syracuse area, it also has a section that is built to freeway standards. It's most useful now as a freeway bypass around the communities of Fairmount and Camillus.
Camillus.
Is it Camillus? I always get
Yes,
that wrong.
Camillus.
All right, Camillus. Okay. I'm sure I will forget that in an hour, but okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We'll quiz you at the end.
Yeah, well, I'm going to flunk that one. The thing to know about this highway is that there was a western extension plan that would have continued the freeway to serve Auburn to the west. And no, not the War Eagle Auburn. No, Auburn,
And
New
the
York.
prison, the prison city. There's and I went to a bar once in Auburn that had an electric chair from the Auburn Women's Prison.
Oh, really?
Did they let you sit in it?
No.
Oh.
He's not a woman. He can't sit in it.
Well, it's an old electric chair. It was no
What?
longer it was no longer operational, and it was in a bar.
They ruin all the fun.
That's true.
Swabby's was an interesting looking bar. So.
They'll sit you there if you try to leave after drinking too much.
Same. Yeah, that too.
Really? That's
Get in a bar fight, sit in a chair.
Get in the chair.
So the east end of the 5 freeway kind of ends, it peters out at a stub kind of junction there, which is more or less right where there would have been a larger interchange with an arterial that would have run into Syracuse from the west, and also the long talked about, long rumored, and yet never built southwestern quadrant of the bypass.
Yeah.
That would have continued on to the southwest to link up with 81 near the 481 interchange. What can you tell us about that, as far as,
For that, like the southwestern bypass, I feel that wasn't ever really practical because, like, if you look at like a map if you look at Syracuse, you like once you get like south of like the city, it gets hilly awfully quick. Like Binghamton, almost.
Yeah. I was thinking like the route that they wanted to build it on was about roughly parallel to, say, New York Route 173.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty hilly section of road. And people don't necessarily realize that, but I mean, that's almost like West Virginia hills.
And
Kind of thing.
historically speaking, that was one of the lesser. That was populated as an area I'd say later than some of the other suburbs in the area.
I can see that, yeah. So I think it was a dotted line on a map, but the practicality wasn't there because it wasn't going to serve nearly enough people. And then engineering-wise, it would have had to have some really wicked viaducts, I would think, to get across a couple of those valleys there. So that's why it just sort of never really went anywhere. It was much easier to build the interstates that were built, and so they just went with that, and by the time they started to give the southwestern bypass, some thought it was already too late to really do much. So that's the deal with that. The one thing that you should know about the 695 freeway is that its choice of route number, it's not unprecedented that a state highway in New York would have. Yeah, we have a little bit of that.
Rainy.
We have a 3-year-old with us tonight.
Yeah, Zeus.
Yeah, so the thing to remember about the 695 freeway is that there are examples in New York State of state highways having the same route number as interstates. One of the ones that comes to mind for me very quickly is New York Route 86 up in the Adirondacks, which, as you know, there's also an Interstate 86 now in New York State. But because they're basically on opposite ends of the state, it doesn't really matter.
Or my favorite, New York State Route 90 actually parallels I-90.
Yeah, well, that's another
little
one. Yeah.
west of Weedsport, actually.
I think that doesn't New York Route 90 crosses over I-90,
It does, and then
doesn't
then it runs like right next to it for a mile.
Yeah. But fortunately, there's no interchange there.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, that would not be confusing at all. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
It is New York Road.
There is an I-695 in New York State, but it's all the way down in the Bronx, so it's a couple hundred miles away from this one. So it's not really that big of a deal. The number comes from a sort of hashing of the two highways that it connects. It connects I-690 with New York Route 5, so they came up with 695.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
How clever is that? Yep. It's a very short freeway. It's over in a blink. If you blink, you miss it.
More or less.
Yeah. We already talked about the state fair, right?
We did, yeah.
So we don't need to cover that again.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's goes basically, it ends at the State Fair, more or less.
More or less, yeah. We do need to talk about the Onondaga Lake Parkway, though. Specifically the infamous 10-foot-9 bridge, which I know has always... It's been in the news every so often.
It's also the roads and lights in the lake.
That too, yeah. So the 10-foot-9 bridge is easily the part of this road that gets talked about the most. And over the years, the state DOT has put a lot of money into advanced warning signs like you see on these pictures here. I don't know that it's really made much of a difference. I can give you a statistic that I pulled from a June 2022 article that says that over a 3-year period between 2019 and 2022, there were 24 different truck strikes at this bridge over that 3-year period.
I love that paint job.
More so it's been in the news a lot. There was also a crash in 2010 involving a megabus that killed 4 people. So this has been... It's probably because the megabus took the wrong ramp and ended up on this and didn't realize that they were too high for the bridge. So that happened. That's been about 12 years. So this bridge has been in the news quite frequently, and it was built long before the Parkway was built. It was built in 1911. It currently carries a CSX railroad track, which is still active, I believe.
Yeah.
So they can't raise it.
They can't raise it.
Can they lower
can't,
the road?
They cannot lower the road because the road is basically at lake level. And because of the water table, lowering the road isn't an option. And CSX has the position of, well, there's nothing wrong with the bridge structurally, so all the issues that are going on are beneath our bridge. So we're not going to pay to replace the bridge unless DOT kicks in the money.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
like the
And so
Glenville
since-
Bridge in the
Who's
Albany
paying for
area.
all the repairs?
Well, it's a CSX bridge, right?
But at what point do the repairs get so expensive it's worth replacing?
Well, I don't know. I mean, this bridge, as you look at it, it's built like a tank. I mean, it's not.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful example of early 20th century truss design and railroad bridge design. Not that dissimilar to the bridge that we talked about last week in Oklahoma City on the I-2 to 35 project. Although that's a new bridge that was built within the last couple of years. But this one kind of mirrors that one. It's just 100 years older. So that's where things stand with that. We're at an impasse because we can't do anything with the bridge and we can't do anything with the road. And DOT has tried to put signs up over the years, and it hasn't really worked. So that's kind of where we're at.
I've heard some other proposals tossed around for that. There were talks about basically giving the Onondaga Lake Parkway a road diet. So maybe having just like one lane of traffic each direction might
That's the solution to everything.
slow things down. Also moving, because Onondaga Lake Parkway is part of State Route 370. Moving
Not laughing
State
at
Route
you,
70 over to moving State Route 370 over to Old Liverpool Road, which is basically kind of on the top of the hill there.
I mean, I guess you could do that. I mean, you still would have the problem with the clearance and people following signs. You know, you're always going to have that problem no matter what you decide to do. And
Put one of those parking garage things before it, so you hit that before you hit the bridge.
Headache bars.
Yeah.
I think they do that in other
I've seen
states
it in other
where
places.
yeah,
If you hit this sign, you will hit the bridge.
I think
Yeah.
The
isn't-
Star
I-
Drive.
yeah, there's very famous ones
So
there. Yeah.
those are the some of the proposals I have. Another thing about the Onondaga Lake Parkway is that the speed limit changes. During the winter, it's
I mean,
lower
switches
speed
are
limit.
fun. I'd like
Mhm.
It's 45 instead of 55.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's another part of it. Yeah.
The renewal's not that smart.
I wasn't afraid.
All right, now Corco had a question about
Absolutely.
I-481 and I-281.
Yes. We were going to
Um,
answer the question.
I used to turn the heat
I was gonna get to it.
Oh,
I
I'm
wasn't.
excited. Okay.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
when they were drawing up the plans for a set of bypass highways around downtown Syracuse, they originally came up with two different highways. There was a highway that was going to roughly parallel and replace New York Route 57 across the north side of town. And there was a separate highway that was going to connect I-81 to the south of town with the Thruway. So originally these were developed and they were intended to be signed as two different routes. North of I-90 it was going to be I-481 and south of the Thruway it was going to be I-281. Around I want to say it was the mid-1970s is when a decision was made to just unite the two designations since it was going to be one continuous highway. And so 281 was phased out and it became known as 481. I don't know if there's any information anywhere that states why they chose 481 instead of 281. I haven't been able to find anything on that.
There's also another example south of Syracuse in Cortland County, around Preble and Homer. There's the State Route 281, so it's not that far away from it. So that
right. Yeah, I forgot about
probably a good guess.
Does 281 down that way predate the interstate?
It does, yeah.
It probably does, right?
And it's close to I-81.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it intersects it, right? There's an interchange for it,
Yeah.
I think, right? Yeah. Yeah. So I mean that makes sense. Sure. So the 481 interstate bypass has its both southern and northern ends at I-81, but extending northwesterly from that northern terminus is a state highway that's also numbered 481, and that'll take you up towards Fulton and Oswego.
And it's a freeway to Fulton, and Fulton is just a regular road that goes through town. And between Fulton and Oswego, it's a 4-lane arterial express. It's a 4-lane expressway. It has a Michigan left.
Oh, does it? It's one of the rare instances in New York State, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
over near Scriba and Minetta.
Okay. Very cool. Because being in Michigan for parts of a couple of years, I just love Michigan lefts, let me tell you.
Yeah.
Anyway, they are something else. All right, now before we go, it's almost time to wrap up. LOL. But I promised we would talk about I-81 in downtown Syracuse.
Ooh,
So
will
here we
somebody give me
go.
my iPad with my notes?
That's it right there?
Yeah.
All right.
I gotcha. Is Rainy gonna get it?
So you kind of all know the back. You all. Oh
Oh
shit.
shit.
We need paper towels.
Oh yeah.
Dude, that's alcohol abuse.
Yep.
It is.
We just had a spill here, guys. Sorry about that. I'm gonna have to edit this part
You just
out.
made that fail?
I need paper towels.
All right. Meanwhile, you can see Mr. Ingram.
Doug, can you vamp for a couple minutes?
Yes. Okay. So I-81,
All right.
as it shows here,
No more open containers in here, guys.
north-south
This is not-
freeway
this
for
is not
Central
good enough.
Syracuse,
Okay.
and
You can't be spilling
basically south of town. Basically, is pretty rural and it becomes city pretty quickly. North of town, they actually, because there's more development north of downtown, they actually widened the highway back during the late 80s, I believe. So it's this really high-powered road, basically north of Thruway, like through Mattydale. Dan has some better notes than I have, but basically the gist of this is, basically through downtown, and this is why it's been such a hot button issue. There was a viaduct that was built, in town. Kind of narrow, I'll be honest with you. It's kind of always felt substandard, even when I was living in the area a number of years ago. And of course, when I was going to school there, that's when they were first talking about getting rid of the viaduct and figuring what they had to do, what they were going to do. And of course, whenever they would talk about the community grid option, like 20 years ago, they'd wheel out the former mayor of Milwaukee.
Well, he has some experience with freeway removals, doesn't he?
Yeah, was it Nordquist or Lundquist?
I don't know what his name
or,
is, but yeah.
He'd always kind of sound whiny when I would read things that he would be quoting in the news.
Well, there you go. Yeah.
That's personal opinion.
Well, that's all right. We're allowed to have our opinions.
Yes.
Here. That's
But of course, there's a debate, and my positions on this will be revealed shortly.
Yeah. So a little bit of more background information here. So 81 has its origins back in the early 50s. During
Pencan Highway.
The Pencan Highway, which was built in the late 50s, early 60s, and it was absorbed into the interstate system as I-81. There's something here. I'll come back to this in a second, but part of one of the real turning points in the city's history and its demographics was the construction of the viaduct downtown. I know you've been waiting to be turned loose for a few minutes here, Laura. So why don't you go ahead?
All right. Hi, sweetie. Rainey's gonna help me present. Yeah, mommy's gonna present. You wanna go on a trip? Yeah. We are. We're on a trip to Syracuse. So long story short, for most of the 19th century, there were a small number of African Americans that lived in Syracuse. You want a hug? Okay. Many of them living north of East Genesee Street near the first AME Zion Church. But as the Great Migration North happened and population of blacks increased towards the mid-20th century, widespread discrimination led to their almost exclusive concentration in the 15th Ward, which is the area immediately east and west of area immediately east and south of downtown. So in 1950, there were almost 4,000 African Americans, 8 out of every 9 in Syracuse that lived there. And population kept increasing into the 1960s. But black citizens comprised only about 5% of city residents overall and lacked political influence. So, thank you, honey. So, Syracuse had an urban renewal plan which called for the area between State Street and Syracuse University to be reborn as government complex, cultural center, and high-rise residential neighborhood. But in the way were the quote-unquote overcrowded slums of the 15th Ward.
Tisk.
Tisk tisk. Much of it substandard housing, but not all of it. And city planners at the time felt that it would be a blessing to eliminate them. So over 27 blocks were targeted, which impacted 75% of the local black population. So basically, 75% of 90% of African Americans in Syracuse were affected by this plan. And you've been with us in the past couple weeks with Birmingham. You thought Birmingham and Oklahoma City were bad. Whew, Syracuse is at the top, takes the cake. But at first, when the neighborhoods were targeted, African Americans thought that, oh, well, maybe this will allow for integration. We'll be able to move to better areas, move to new neighborhoods, if, the viaduct's going to destroy the 15th Ward. But unfortunately, not only were they not fairly compensated, but it became soon apparent that other city neighborhoods were unwilling to accept African Americans. And so basically, they were only able to go into other rundown older neighborhoods, south and east of the 15th Ward. And then as black residents, moved in different parts of the city, then there was white flight, and the population of Syracuse dropped dramatically. The big tragedy of, and it's interesting because there were protests. Hold on, sweetie. There were protests, but at the time, the protests were not so much about preserving the neighborhood, but being able to find better housing and being able to have integration. Because residents felt like it was inevitable that they were going to lose their houses, but maybe this would be the chance for there to be integration. And, unfortunately, that ended up not truly being the case. You had arrests and set against civil rights protests in the South. Interestingly, I mentioned a couple weeks ago about Birmingham, and people felt like that it was outsiders that were contributing to protests, and same sort of deal here in Syracuse. But yeah, because residents thought that maybe, yes, this is a trade-off. We're going to lose our neighborhood where we feel safe and can truly hold on to our heritage and traditions, but maybe we'll get, something out of it. But the first buildings that came down were in 1956 in the Triangle Block at South State Street and East Washington Street, right across from Syracuse City Hall. And those buildings included boarding houses for black tenants. $24 million was spent on the Near East Side at the edge of downtown. And multiple blocks that were cleared, it also included the best of the African American neighborhoods. And it wasn't just the viaduct that was built for I-81, but also several office and government buildings. But yeah, it was unfortunate that this was not an accident, that this was very intentional, that urban renewal was made to displace these residents, that there were policy decisions with the viaduct being put where it was to displace the black community.
I think it's important that we pause at this point to recognize that all of the conversation that goes on about the community grid, we don't really talk about how this highway even happened in the first place. And I think that is a big part of the puzzle here when you're dealing with history and you're dealing with a city's relationship with an urban highway. I think that has a lot to do with how cities take the positions that they take on these highways in their future. How a highway comes into existence in the first place oftentimes plays a role in whether it stays or not, or whether public opinion supports it staying or not. And I feel like from the beginning, this highway has had a lot running against it. Not necessarily from the engineering standpoint, but from the fact that it was done in such a ridiculous, heinous way that really reshaped the demographics of the city, and it reshaped really the history of the county as a whole. And I think that that's something that doesn't really get discussed very much. It doesn't come up, because people talk about it on social media all the time, but nobody ever talks about where this really started. And I would argue that the community grid has its roots in the year 1956.
Yeah.
Because that's when people really turned on this highway. They turned on it before it was even built. And, whatever you want to say about it, those kinds of feelings don't go away over generations. They tend to linger because this highway has been here all these years and people are reminded of its presence on a daily basis because they can see it, And people remember what used to be there, and people, whatever you want to say about people and their opinions, people have long memories about certain things, especially in urban environments like this.
I think it's worth noting too. So I can semi-relate in the sense that my grandparents, their farm was ultimately purchased by Baltimore County, but they went through a huge process because the county wanted to use eminent domain to condemn it, and they had to fight in order to get a fair price. But that's something that, this is my grandparents, and is still felt in my family today, that it wasn't entirely their choice in the matter. That it wasn't, they didn't have the full 100% freedom, right? To say, I want to sell my land to become part of a park system. And that it was sort of, their hand was forced. And I think that's something we need to think about with history and why these sorts of wounds still hurt communities 50, 60, 70 years later, is that their hands were forced. They were forced to give up, their homes, their places of worship, their community centers, and it wasn't something that they had the choice in the matter of whether they wanted to hold on to for their children, grandchildren, or if they wanted to, so they didn't have the choice. And I think that that's a really important thing to think about in the United States, where we really think about our freedoms and what freedom means to us, and being forced to move and losing that history and not having a hand in what happens to that history. It's one thing if you choose to sell your house and then it gets torn down and built to whatever, but to have your hand forced into that and losing your cultural history, it leaves that mark.
And I'd like to interject my own experience into this. As some of you may know, we've been up to my cabin and just outside the Catskills. More so like 5-10 years ago, there was a proposal by oil company. It was the Williams or Cabot Williams or something like that. They wanted to build a natural gas pipeline from Pennsylvania out towards Albany, and they felt that they would they felt that they would have a better chance instead of having to deal with like New York State building along I-88, or they would just go through basically try to get the easements for people from individual landowners, and so we actually we're against this because my father actually, this was my father's cabin, his property, he bought it, so we're like, oh, this was his place to get away. We didn't want we didn't want a natural gas pipeline to go through the back of our property. Just not something we wanted. And they wound up with they were able to take this pipeline company. They were able to take their part of the land by eminent domain. What happened though was they did not get the permission to build it from New York State because they couldn't prove water right, how that they would mitigate wetlands and water rights and things like that. And so the project wound up getting canceled, and we actually went through the courts because we actually did not sign. My family is one of 55 landowners in Schoharie County, that did not authorize the eminent domain. So we're actually, through the courts, we were actually able to get basically the land back from eminent domain for that part of the back part of the cabin. And so now, nowadays, there's more leg to stand on for some of these, like taking land for like a freeway or a park or a pipeline through eminent domain and basically fighting against it than you did.
That's big.
I'd say basically during the 50s or 60s.
There is one thing that I'd like to add too. So my mom lived in Wilmington, Delaware as a kid, and so she was born in the early '60s, and she and her older sister, my aunt, have pretty good memories of the construction of I-95 through downtown Wilmington, which, as you may know, was built as an elevated freeway. Parts of it were elevated, parts of it were below grade because of the geology of the area. But the history that was lost there, and the fact that a big chunk of the city's pre-1950 identity was lost with that construction, I think that's always been something that I've been aware of, and I've always sort of had a heightened awareness of it, of those kinds of things, just because of what you hear about, mouth to mouth over the years. But it's not that I'm anti-highway. I know that that's what it gets skewed into, and that's what people turn it into, and that's not what it is. It's to understand, road enthusiasm is actually a lot more complicated than I think we want to admit sometimes. And that we love urban drives, right? Like, we love a good Sunday morning. I'm going to go out and enjoy 81 and 690 in Syracuse. I'm going to enjoy
the best time to drive it because no one else is on the road.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, in any city. I've been to, you can name any city in America, and I've been to it. I love driving the James Lake Skyway in San Francisco. I love the, Lakeshore Drive in Chicago, or the, I didn't get the chance to drive the old Central Artery in Boston, but boy, would I have loved to do that.
I did.
Good for you. Congratulations.
I did not get to drive the Alaskan Way Viaduct in Seattle.
Well,
I got to see it.
Yeah, I missed out. I missed out on that too. Yeah.
I finally made it through the tunnel last year. Or no, not the last year. This year, actually.
The tunnel's nice. Not gonna lie. Check out our Seattle webinar for more information on that, folks. By the way. But the point that I want to make is that, we're all very enamored with urban drives, and we love the scenery, and we love being behind the wheel, and all that stuff. And I think that that's what a lot of people want road enthusiasm to be. But part of the issue is that if you actually sit down and think about how these roads actually came to exist, there's a whole lot of history there. And there's a whole lot of eggshells that you can walk on, too. And so there's no such thing as an urban freeway project that is black and white. I mean, I'm not talking about the racial part.
No, I know.
I said that, and I had to immediately turn to you and clarify. But
Most of them were black versus white.
Well, I think you would find that that's more common than not. Yeah.
Tune into our Charlestown, West Virginia webinar.
Yeah. But the I guess the thing to remember here is that, Doug, you have said for a long time that road enthusiasm is whatever you make of it.
Yeah.
That's one of your catchphrases that I really like.
Yeah. And I look at it different because, a lot of people like urban drives. I am a sucker for, the more rural aspect.
So you love the covered bridges, yeah.
Covered bridges.
I'm on your side here.
Yeah.
Like to come down here, I took US 9. I didn't take the Thruway.
Yeah.
That's just kind of an example.
I think a lot of people probably think I come on here to bash highways, and couldn't be further from the truth. I love highway drives, even still.
Who doesn't love them, right?
It's just so...
We like roads, man.
Yeah, we really do. It's just that I'm an HBCU graduate. I'm a graduate from a historically black college university. And I'm a very nerdy white girl.
You do stand out sometimes, I'm not going to lie.
I do. And so for me to realize that there's all of this, both overlooked and sometimes I almost feel like intentionally hidden history. And it's just really, important to me that we realize the sacrifices.
Whoa, hi, Mommy.
Hi, sweetie. That we realize the sacrifices of, of in particular Black citizens, for some of these great roads and drives that we love.
So getting back to what I said about Doug and his point about road enthusiasm being what you make it, a lot of people choose to make it just that, about just the drives and, I'm going to go on a drive, I'm going to post pictures on the Road Geekery Facebook group, I'm going to, do this and that and the other thing, and that's it. And that's perfectly fine, right? I think that's what the vast majority of people choose to do.
Yeah.
I choose to make it about a little bit more than that. Because I think that, as a history buff in general, and because of my personal, connection to a major urban highway that was not very popular when it was built down in Delaware, I kind of feel like this is something that we should talk more about. And like I said, you may choose to make something else out of this hobby. That's fine. I'm totally all right with that. But I don't think that there should be this, anti-discussion attitude that crops up also. Like when I shared the links to this show tonight, and I shared it at a few different locations, people were not shy about voicing their opinions right then and there, without even having watched a second of this show. But that just goes to show like how polarizing this topic is, and some of the excuses that people were using to justify their opinions are just, respectfully, they're not well educated. And I think that's a big part of the problem here also. And I just wish that there was more dialogue. I wish that there was more civil debate about things. What tends to happen nowadays is that both sides will say what they have to say initially, and then for whatever reason some trigger happens and then things get really nasty. No one's ever able to agree on anything anymore. The way that we debate things nowadays, nobody does so in a healthy way on Facebook. You don't see people saying, there's rarely anybody who says, you know what, all right, I don't agree with you, but that's fine, I get it. I get where you're coming from, Yep. But you don't really see that. We don't have to agree on that. Like, you might have a perspective on this that's wildly different than me. But I'm not, but I would say to you as a fellow road enthusiast and as a friend, I would say, I get it. I understand where you're coming from.
At my end, I also like to look at the pros and cons of a certain thing. Like, we may be, as far as this viaduct discussion and debate, when I was formulating my opinion on is this a good idea or not, I looked at a number of different factors, not necessarily basically uprooting the community, but I was looking at basically the commuting patterns. I was looking at the finances, redundancy, things like that.
Yeah, well, I want to talk about the redundancy part in a second here, but just to finish up what I was saying before about how debate happens on Facebook. Well, ideally you would like to get together and be like, there'll be 3 people over here and there'll be 3 people over here, and they have differing opinions on it. They come at it from different angles, but at the end of the day, all 6 people agree to be civil about it and respectful about it, and maybe all 6 people come away from that discussion learning something that they didn't already know. That's kind of what civil discourse used to be. It's not really what it's like that's not the way that it works anymore. People are just at each other's throats, or they can't wait to be at each other's throats. And so when this community grid project was officially announced, I believe I got more notes here. Let me see. New York State DOT selected the community grid alternative in April 2019 for reconstructing I-81 through downtown Syracuse. Under this plan, as I'm sure you know by now, 81 will be rerouted to bypass Syracuse along the I-481 corridor, while the section of 81 through downtown Syracuse, the original I-81, will be designated as I-81 Business Loop. So we'll actually have a new business loop in the Northeast for the first time in forever.
For the first time in forever. Sorry, we have a 3-year-old on the call. I had to get a Frozen reference.
I know. This alternative was estimated to cost about $2 billion in 2019 dollars. So as part of this community grid, it's being divided up into different phases. So let me skip ahead a few slides here. We'll come back to these slides in a second. But what you're looking at on this slide is basically an overall view of the scope of work here. So you see where 81 is now and where it's going to be. And I-481 will disappear entirely. I presume that the freeway north and west of there will still be New York 481. There's no reason to change that. Yeah.
I don't envision them changing that.
Yeah. So there will be significant work at the two ends of what was 481 because now you'll have mainline I-81 transitioning onto what used to be the exits, quote unquote, for 481. So you'll have significant work at what they're dubbing the north interchange and the south interchange at each end. And then there will be improvements to interchanges along the 481 corridor, and there will be additions of travel lanes. I think a lot of it is going to remain 4 lanes total, but there will be spots where it gets to 6 lanes or wider than that, especially in the area between the east end of 690 and the Thruway interchange. I think that's the heaviest traveled section of 481 as it is. So you would need to do something
really
significant
between,
there.
basically between 690 and 5.
690
and
and
5.
Oh, so down, like, further down, like, this
down
way.
towards DeWitt, yeah.
Like, down in this area here, yeah. So, like, I could see, yeah, I do think there are planned improvements at that 5 interchange also.
Yeah, it's going to be needed.
Yeah. So the project, the community grid alternative was selected in 2019, as I said. Construction was supposed to begin on the first phase in 2022. It looks like that's been pushed to 2023. There is a little bit of a wrinkle in all of this, in that in November of 2022, a lawsuit was filed in the New York State Supreme Court, and a temporary injunction was issued that stops the state DOT from starting construction on this project for the time being. The lawsuit was initiated by a community-led organization known as Renew 81 for All, who argued in court for a temporary restraining order against the project. This group, which is a grassroots project that is opposed to the community grid alternative, is led by a gentleman named Frank Fowler, who was the former chief of police of the city of Syracuse. And it also has support from municipalities on both sides of downtown, particularly DeWitt, Salina, and Tully. So the restraining order that was issued in court recently prohibits the state from proceeding with construction, although my understanding is that some of these contracts for this first phase have already been awarded, so I don't know if that prevents them from going ahead. I'm not a legal expert or anything like that, but basically what they're arguing is that so oral arguments are scheduled for January 12th of 2023. That's all that I have here, but it's basically a last-ditch effort to scrap the community grid plan. Does it have much of a chance? Not really. It's more of a speed bump more than anything else. But
Maybe the viaduct will fall down before then.
Well, that's the other thing. That's the other thing that we need to consider here. That it's not like the existing 81 viaduct is in good shape to begin with. And these are just sample pictures that I took underneath the bridge. The bridge is a lengthy structure. There are parts of it that look much better than this. There are also parts of it that look worse than this. This is just a sampling of pictures that I took underneath when I was walking down Almond Street a couple months ago. And yeah, this bridge was put up pretty quick, early 1960s. It's early interstate era construction. And let's be honest, it's due for replacement anyway. And I think that's where a lot of this talk about community grid and what the heck to do with the highway comes from. I would say that regardless of what the new quote-unquote 81 looks like, any replacement of the viaduct in town would require a long-term closure of I-81 anyway. There simply is not enough room laterally to build a new structure parallel to the existing structure, plus connect all the new ramps that you would need to, while keeping the existing 81 in operation. As Doug has alluded to recently, there has been new development at the Upstate Medical Center.
Yes.
That's what it's called, right?
Basically SUNY Upstate Medical Center.
Yeah, so there's that. There's also the Syracuse University, which continues to expand on the east side of Almond Street.
Yep. ESF, which is SUNY Environmental Science and Forestry.
Yeah, and there simply is not enough room there. I mean, the freeway that exists today is basically cantilevered over the existing Almond Street. And they're really, I mean, if you look at these pictures here, there's not a whole lot of room to work with there. I mean, you can see the buildings here on the right, and there's also development on the left. So they kind of shoved this into a small right-of-way. There's not enough room to put a new structure there.
Could you stage it one lane at a time?
Well, I mean, DOT would like this project to be done in less than 20 years. So, I mean, could you do it in theory? Yeah, I guess you could. The problem is that the geometry here doesn't really work, which is why
Existing piers, you need a lot of temporary
so
supports.
yeah, and keep in mind that these existing supports span one direction of Almond Street. So you'd have to do some sort of weird traffic pattern on Almond Street, because you'd basically be closing off half the road at that point, and that would be a nightmare in and of itself. And that's without even getting into the construction of the new highway on the other half of Almond Street. So, I mean, you really don't have a lot of room to work with here. And so that's why I say that when the community grid proposal was approved in 2019, the first phase of it, which involves improvements to 481, I actually think that would have to happen anyway, because you would have to shut down 81 through downtown, and the only way that you could really do that is if you had a redundant highway to, at least for a long-term detour purpose, take that traffic away.
And that's the only redundancy you have.
Yeah. So let's talk about redundancy for a second, because one of the things that people cite, and I believe the Renew 81 group brings this up as well, they talk about system redundancy when it comes to freeways, which I'm an advocate for myself. You know, it's more to do with bridges for me than freeways, but they are very similar in theory. You don't just want to have one option.
Yeah.
And so when you have a situation like this where you have really two good options, you have the existing 81 and you have the 481 bypass, you're now eliminating one of those freeway options, which severely restricts your redundancy when it comes to the system. And so that's where I think a lot of this is rooted in.
Whether it's a short-term issue, let's say a bad accident, which, let's say it closes 81, let's say if there's a bad accident.
Speaking of bad accidents, did you hear about the truck fire on the viaduct last week?
Not even not.
Yeah, so we kind of got a little bit of a sneak preview about a full shutdown of 81 through downtown, because there was a truck fire right here on the elevated structure that shut down the freeway for most of the day.
But if you have something short term like a bad accident, you only have one alternative. Whereas if you, let's say, had a viaduct, or let's say you replaced it with, say, cut and cover, or one option that they were looking at, which was prohibitively expensive, was a tunnel option. So they were thinking about tunneling 81, basically underneath where the viaduct is now. That, I think, was something where they were like, okay, because there was enough opposition at one point to the community grid where the DOT is basically okay, let's kind of throw this bone out for an additional option, but the finances really don't dictate a tunnel option. But if you look at a more long-term redundancy issue, let's say construction, for instance, where there's going to be like a slowdown on the one of the existing routes. You know, with having a redundant option, you can take the other freeway. Whereas if you remove the viaduct, for instance, and there's construction on what will be 81, which is now 41, you're kind of sitting in traffic.
I mean,
yeah.
I appreciate the concept of redundancy, and certainly Syracuse has been a great place where they've had the ability to have redundancy. But you said the population of the metro is what, 440,000, something like that.
And it's supposed to go down by about 100,000.
I mean, having two freeways for that. I mean, there's a lot of cities in this country that don't have multiple freeways that are dealing with similar population numbers.
Yeah, and Syracuse has two east-west freeways, well, you know, and two north-south freeways. That basically serves those purposes.
Can we deal with a couple
and Business 81. I mean, it's not like Business 81 is going to go away. It will still be.
Well,
I assume it is the redundant option.
Yeah.
It'll be a surface street, but it'll be.
Yeah.
It'll be a
And
30 mile an
it'll
hour
be-
surface street.
But
Yeah.
it'll be capable of carrying
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
amount of capacity.
And I
right?
think
It's not gonna
north
be a-
of not Carousel, Destiny USA, there we go, Carousel again. they're supposed to keep that as it is.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think they're doing anything north of 690, right?
Yeah.
I think it's the improvements that are in question are between 690 and Adams Harrison, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think also too, because basically, once you get past the mall, that's the basically that's where they don't really need to blend it into the community, so to speak.
Yeah, can we address a couple elephants in the room here when it comes to this? One of them you guys have alluded to already, and that is the population decline. That has to be factored in here too, I think. And then another thing that has to be factored in is cost. We mentioned the tunnel option, which, I mean, that's wonderful. You want to build a tunnel, that's great. But, tunnels don't grow on trees, unfortunately. Certainly the magnitude of what you would be looking to do here. Boston, I think, is one of the crowning examples of urban tunneling technology in these kinds of settings.
Yeah.
And that project is, let's just be honest about it, it wasn't cheap to build, and it took, more than a couple of years to build.
Or Seattle with the Alaskan Way.
Well, the Alaskan Way, I think Corco can talk about the Alaskan Way because, he's more familiar with Seattle than most of us are. But the Alaskan Way was a headache.
It was
To put that tunnel in.
Well,
And I mean the tunnel itself, now that it's open, I've had the chance to drive it. It's a nice tunnel. I'm not complaining about the condition of it, but I guarantee you that the people of Syracuse aren't willing to put up with 10 to 12 years of construction. For something like
Right,
this,
well,
it's just there has to be some sort of a balance here also.
Right. Well, Syracuse isn't Boston or Seattle.
It's
Right.
not. I mean, let's be honest about it. That's my point. Like let's just call it like it is. Syracuse ain't that important.
No.
I hate to break it to you guys, but should we be expending $5 to $7 billion on a tunnel for a city like Syracuse? I don't see how that makes any sense.
It's got to be important for the chip fab industry, though.
Where is that chip plant being built?
Town of Clay at Route 31 and Cottoneye Road, so north of town.
So north of town.
And so that's something that the last couple times I was in Syracuse, friends and family, that's all they're talking about is, the chip fab plant. And of course, I've lived through something similar with Global Foundries in the Albany area, where they came in, and not only do you have everyone moving in because of the chip fab, you have all the suppliers as well that want to be right next door.
Yeah.
So that could, basically be another wrinkle into, how the future of the Syracuse transportation network is set up too.
Oh sure. Yeah.
You might.
Well, there's been as I'm sure you all know if you're following the news, there's been a push to domesticate, semiconductor and computer chip production here in America, and so a facility like this on the north side of Syracuse is obviously going to be, a big deal. And so, but they didn't select the community grid knowing that this was going to happen either.
Right.
So that that's one of those things. Like, you do the best you can to forecast traffic as far as expectations and all that, but I look at traffic modeling, and with due respect to traffic engineers and all that, I don't really pay a lot of attention to that stuff because there's just so much unknown that's out there. As far as industry is concerned, as far as commuting habits, leisurely travel habits, all that stuff. I mean, it all factors into the forecasting. But
going back to cost, to me, the community option, if you're looking at it from a financial aspect, New York State doesn't have a lot of money to throw around. So the community grid option is pretty much the only way you could realistically go. And I think you'll see more examples of this around New York as well.
Well, yeah, there are certainly other candidates.
787 in Albany, I think, is next on the list.
Well, so I think that one of the things that is going to come out of this, one of the positives, whether I agree with this project or not, one of the things that I think is going to be really interesting is that this is going to be a case study that people are going to look at. What happens when you take away a freeway like this in an urban area? Granted, it's a modest-sized city like Syracuse, but it's going to be interesting. This engineer thinks it's going to be interesting anyway. I don't know, maybe the rest of you don't think it will be. But what happens when you take away a highway like this? And you have to, and the traffic pattern is sort of set into some sort of shock where it has to find new ways around things.
Especially when a lot of the major employers around Syracuse are right off of the existing viaduct. SUNY Upstate, Syracuse University.
That's one of those counterintuitive things, right? Like, the university should want easy access.
Yeah, and
but
there's also St. Joe's Hospital, which is right in the area too.
But there's other reasons why SU does not want the freeway.
Yeah, well, because
it hinders
will connect them closer to like downtown Syracuse, Arbor Square.
It hinders their development further west of Almond, for one thing, and then another elephant in the room is that this is their claim. This is not coming out of my mouth. This is coming out of people affiliated with SU, that the Almond Street corridor is not a safe place after dark. And part of the reason for that is because the Viaduct is a place for homeless and drug dealing and all sorts of other stuff to go on. And it abuts the edge of their campus, and they don't like that. And I think that's another issue here that is not really being talked about that much. I mean, it's sad. I don't want to make it sound like I'm sympathetic to the university on this, but it is out there as a thing, and putting a new structure isn't in their eyes going to solve that problem. So that's where they're coming from on that issue. So that's why they support just getting rid of it and putting a boulevard where you can put up all sorts of security cameras and red light cameras and speed cameras and bike lanes. We can't forget the bike lanes also.
But, of course, who's going to bike in the winter in Syracuse?
Well,
they're crazy. It snows all the time.
Well,
Now, couldn't they just put a lot more lighting under the existing one to make it marginally safer?
Well,
I think the issue is psychological as well as sociological too.
Yeah.
I think that people, it's the whole Jane Jacobs eyes on the street thing, right? When you have buildings and there's windows, you assume that hypothetically somebody is looking, could be looking out and making sure that nothing bad is going to happen, right? But you have a freeway where there's nothing out there. It generates this fear of, I can't cross under that. What if there's somebody, hiding that's going to come out and rob me or whatever?
Putting in brighter lights makes less areas for someone to theoretically hide.
Yes, but we also come back to the original problem here, which is that the structure needs to be replaced anyway.
Lights don't help that.
And it doesn't solve that issue, no. And again, I'm not trying to suggest that I agree with the university's position on this, but I do think that it is a position that does hold some merit. I mean, I full disclosure here, I've never lived in Syracuse a day of my life, so I can't speak to what these claims are and how legitimate they are, but these things always come from somewhere. They don't just get made up in a vacuum they don't
And
just
we've
get,
heard similar
you know.
things about similar structures all over the country.
Well, that's because that's oftentimes a common use for them
Yeah.
across our cities, right? And again, like I said, it's
And
not.
It's unfortunate because
Yeah.
like there needs to be more resources out there, and that's a whole other discussion.
Join us next week for that webinar.
Well, we talk about the ways, Laura's theories for how we could end homelessness and the war.
Followed closely by the anti-homeless infrastructure.
Oh God, I hate hostile architecture. I could rant a whole episode about
That's
that.
next
Well, you can come on next week and talk about that then.
All right.
Okay.
On Christmas Eve.
That's
All right,
a
sure.
great time. And you can
Yeah.
teach, and you can teach Salem, Oregon a thing or two.
Yeah. Wait, I'm surprised you haven't already.
Well, not me, Laura.
I mean, yeah.
But
Let me just give you a couple of more statistics here about the rough timeline. So, assuming that there aren't any additional legal obstacles, the first contracts affiliated with the first phase of this project, which involves improving the existing I-481, are expected to begin in 2023. At this point, they're hoping to have those projects completed by the end of 2025, which would allow them to shut down the existing 81 viaduct either at the end of 25 or early 26. So you still have another 3 years or so to drive this thing, if you haven't done so already. The project, once they shut down the 81, that conversion to the Almond Street arterial will take another 2 to 3 years to complete. They are expecting, at least as of today, for all this work to be complete by the end of 2028.
Is there any discussion of turning it into like a high line for pedestrians?
I don't
do
know
that
that-
with the Skyway in Buffalo briefly.
It's interesting. Like the Skyway idea actually was kind of cool, at least to me. But I don't think that there was ever like an idea of preserving parts of this for
No.
pedestrian use.
I've not really, I've heard anything about preserving anything. It's just a matter of getting rid of it, connecting like the university to downtown. Of course, I also think the next thing is, let's say the next thing they want to do is to connect downtown with the lake. They'll have to figure out 690 eventually too.
Well, so that's another thing that people often discuss. It's like, well, if we allow the community grid to happen with 81, well, then the 690 will be the next target.
Yeah, that's
Right. That's kind of like the logical progression there.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that I want to go down that rabbit hole tonight, but
No.
that's a whole another discussion of what ifs for another time, I
Yeah.
think. But I'll go on the record. I'm not even sure I'd be opposed to that either. But that's another show for another time. As far as what do I think? Everybody wants to know. Oh, what is? I've been looking for this brush for the last hour. Somebody took my hairbrush out of the the restroom and has been parading around with it lately.
Yeah, the lavatory.
It's my fault. I took it, and I think Randy was playing with it at some point.
Clearly, somebody was. I don't think the Doughies were.
Bring
I
it.
can assure you it wasn't me.
Yeah, I don't see you as being somebody who would want to play with something like this.
You have to blame these Bianca Pruitt girls over here.
The rowdy girls over here. I'm sure that everybody wants to know what my opinion is of this whole thing, right? I mean, everybody wants to be put on the record as saying, I agree with this proposal. I think this proposal is garbage, because, everybody on Facebook can't wait to give you their opinion. Whether they're educated in the facts or not. We know that's not just true in the roads community, it's true everywhere. When it was first announced, it certainly was an eyebrow raiser for me because, as I said, we haven't really dealt with something like this before, at least in New York State. And I was filled with, negative feelings towards it initially because of that. But also I was filled simultaneously with a feeling of intrigue because I'm a civil engineer. That's what I do for a living. And one of the things that I am paid to do is to be objective and to come up with solutions to problems. It's in my blood and it's in my nature to do that. And so after a couple of years have gone by and it's become clear that this is definitely going to happen, who am I to judge the city of Syracuse for wanting to do this? I think that the city of Syracuse and New York State DOT has earned the right to try it. Why have they earned that right? Because they exist. And they have the right as a state and as a city to chart their own course. And as I said before, I think that regardless of what was chosen here, it was going to be an interesting study as far as what happens to traffic patterns regionally, for one.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is what happens locally here. What you're looking at here are conceptual drawings. These are not the final designs. The final designs are actually being worked on currently. They don't have to have the final designs complete until phase 1 is complete in 2 or 3 years. But these are conceptual renderings of the community grid option that were released about 2 or 3 years ago. And people will say, well, there will never be that many people walking around that intersection.
That was the first thing I thought when I saw that picture.
In year 0, I can see that. But I don't, the university is expanding still. And the medical center is still expanding.
Yeah.
And so, again, I'm not an expert in traffic modeling and all that other stuff. But I do think that there is something to this modeling. As I said before, it comes from somewhere. Right? It comes from a projection that somebody's coming up with. And you look at all those new glass-faced buildings that are going up with the medical center and the university right on Almond Street already. I mean, it was to say that, in 20 or 30 years, there's not another big development on the other side of Almond Street that was made possible because we got rid of an aging viaduct that was in the way. We've talked about these last 3 weeks how 3 different cities have approached the same problem with a different solution.
Yep.
We talked about Birmingham and how they built their new structure basically in place. It's a wider bridge, but it was built basically within the same footprint on I-20 and 59. We looked at Oklahoma City, and we looked at how they tore down their elevated highway, but they put the new highway in a different spot that was less disruptive and was more welcoming to development, which is what I call the relocate, right? So remember, if we go back to this slide here, we talked about the 3 R's, right? Replace, remove, relocate. So this theme this month of December has been 3 cities that have addressed this same basic problem 3 different ways, right? We talked about Birmingham, which was replace in place, basically. Oklahoma City was relocate. And you can kind of make an argument that Syracuse is relocate also. However, I would say that it's not, because you're not building a new highway to replace. You're not building a new 4-lane highway somewhere else to replace the 4-laner that already exists, right? So it's not. You're relocating I-81, but you're not really relocating the capacity in the system, right?
Yep.
So 3 different solutions to the same problem. I would say, as an engineer and a planner, that this is going to be a really interesting next 20 to 30 years.
Yep.
So that you can put all 3 of these cities, and there are other examples too. I don't mean to just single these 3 out, but if you really want to study this kind of stuff, remember, road enthusiasm is what you make of it.
Right.
And I tend to make a bit more of it than the average person, but it's going to be really interesting because not only were the Birmingham and Oklahoma City projects seemingly successful, but once 81 shuts down in downtown Syracuse, all the people in the Facebook comments and in the live chat can say whatever they want. I don't know what the hell is going to happen. And that's part of what makes this idea so interesting, is that it's so different and that it hasn't quite been tried like this before. And I think that we owe it to ourselves to see what happens. Why not just give it a shot and see what happens?
This is my thought on this. And I would also like to mention that we haven't tried removing a freeway in New York. The inner loop, they've removed at least part of it in recent years out in Rochester. But of course that wasn't really a capacity issue the same way that 81 presents.
Yeah, nobody was on the
Yeah, I think it was that. I think the average, because it was basically a highway to Kodak, and since Kodak isn't really the major player that it once was. I think the average daily traffic counts were down to like 8,000. But basically for this, I have mixed emotions about it. Basically, not necessarily from a road enthusiast aspect, but somebone who's familiar with the area. Basically, has routed these roads for normal road geeking purposes. Basically for someone who basically they're used to the commuting patterns. So basically that's going to be a bit of an adjustment. Of course, that's something with the way the world's changing, more people basically working remotely, things like that.
Yeah, and that wasn't something that was considered when the community grid came up, but that's something that has factored into traffic modeling recently as well. Yeah,
that is something where maybe with shifting patterns, with a lot more employers, like, okay, you can work from home sometimes or all the time, or what have you. You aren't going to see as many people, unless things change again, basically commuting like they once were. So maybe it won't be quite of a harsh transition. Maybe, I'm not sure if that's the right word.
I do think that people are over-exaggerating the transitional period here that's coming up. I do think you get a lot of people in road enthusiasm who are like, oh, it's Armageddon for Syracuse the second that this viaduct shuts down, and I just don't see that being true. I do think that there will be a period of transition, which is what happens with any new piece of infrastructure that comes online. It takes time for people to realize that patterns are different, and it takes time for people to get used to the new layout of things. But what you see a lot of times on Facebook is that people see, there was a, like let's just say the viaduct is closed for the first, week, and there's a truck fire on the new 81 that shuts down the highway.
Yeah.
And everyone's going like, well, see, you shouldn't have opted for the community grid because of, now there's only one highway around Syracuse. But, but that's how people form their opinions nowadays also.
Yeah.
And, and it goes back to what I said before about how people aren't necessarily that educated.
Yep.
And I say that with all due respect, I do. But let's be honest, I think it's just fashionable nowadays for people to just write, comments in the sections because everybody can claim that they're their own expert on these things.
And on the flip side,
yeah.
And on the flip side, going to the community option as opposed to replacing the viaduct, tunnel, what have you, is the most cost-effective option, and basically that's something that isn't talked about enough. Like, hey, it's like go to these community grid options when it makes sense. I mean, it may not didn't make sense for, let's say, Seattle with the Elastic Way Viaduct. That made more sense to replace the viaduct with a tunnel, for instance, because you do need to have the capacity there. But in like a place like Syracuse or Albany even, it actually makes financial sense to just say, burn it all.
Well, again,
with freeways.
Well, but I mean, to go back to what I said before, I mean, it's just Syracuse, people. It's not.
Right.
It is not. Chicago or Houston or.
Well, you know what? As somebody, I will say this: as somebody from a Rust Belt city, from Baltimore, I think it's the way to look at it. Look, Baltimore is still important to me. And I think it is a very important city. And I think Syracuse, I think all these Rust Belt cities are still really important. But we have to look at the reality that they're not growing. And building a tunnel in a city that's not growing is would be a tremendous cost without the payoff.
Yeah, the community grid option as far as finances, and especially in, let's say, places with declining or stagnant population, or like the governments just don't have enough money to put towards, transportation, basically expenditures.
I mean,
it's a financial necessity.
I mean, it's worth noting if Syracuse ever were to become the next Seattle or Austin or wherever, and people started flocking to Syracuse and
Well, with
mass.
climate
You could
change, they
probably
might have to move
Yeah,
to Syracuse.
exactly. You could probably still bore a tunnel and bring that capacity back
Right.
and incur that expense if that were to become necessary decades down the road or
Yeah.
at some point. In the
Well,
future.
yeah, I mean,
you're
you
not
know,
doing anything to prevent.
yeah, I mean,
Right,
right.
right,
I mean, you
yeah.
never really know how traffic patterns are going to evolve over
Right,
the
right.
next couple generations, and of
Right.
course, technology is going to evolve. You know, if we ever get to a point where I'm just going to throw this out there. Let's say that we're all driving electric cars 50 years from now, and the emissions and the noise issue is no longer part of the equation when being anti-freeway.
Right.
You know, freeway construction all of a sudden becomes a bit more palatable. You know, when you eliminate the pollution and the noise and the lights and all that stuff from the equation. So, yeah, I mean, I guess for the year 2022, it seems to me that Syracuse had to make a choice, and this is the choice that they made for this year and for the next, at least the next generation. Who knows how long that's going to be. But as I said before, that it's their right to do that. And I think that we sometimes forget the fact that roads are great. We love our urban drives, but they are possible because of the people who built them, and they are possible because of the people who helped fund their construction,
Yep.
and they're also possible because of the people who live next door to them. And I think that I believe that we need to take a wider view when it comes to considering feasibility of highway projects past and present. And part of the equation is, I know that some people don't like to hear this, but part of evaluating the feasibility or the, you know, whether a project is worth it or not, is understanding how the highway in the first place came to be. And it's understanding how we got to this place. And I think that there needs to be more of that kind of discussion in general. I hope that at some point the light bulb will go off in people's heads on Facebook, and that they'll realize that there actually is a bit more to the story than just yelling about, you can't tear down this urban freeway, how dare you? That is not the only part of the story here. It might be a valid opinion. You know, and I know that there are people who feel that way. Like, you can't remove I-81 through downtown Syracuse. What are you talking about? And that is a valid viewpoint. I'm not trying to say that it isn't. But, you know, when we discuss these things and when we debate them back and forth, I think that there needs to be a bit more rounded of a general knowledge of how we got to this moment in time. And I think that I like to think that yours truly and this panel who gathered here tonight did a very good job of illustrating that. And I would like to thank Doug, Erica, Corco, Bill. Hi, Bill.
Hi.
And our early vote getter for season 4 MVP, Laura, for helping us navigate this very complicated issue tonight.
Thank you.
The live chat is here for you guys to ask us questions in the next few minutes if you would like.
I would like to add something that
Please.
I wanted to put in before, just didn't know where to say it. So Mike and I visited Syracuse back in fall of 2010. And the thing that surprised me the most about Syracuse, we were there on a fall weekend, and we were just shocked at how dead downtown was. And I remember we drove 81, we were in the downtown, and I remember just like taking all these pictures of the freeway and being like, this is the deadest city with a large flagship university that I've ever been to. It kind of blew my mind because I was expecting the downtown to be bustling because of Syracuse University being there, and it wasn't. And I was very surprised by that, and we thought, well, was it an off weekend? Did we
Was
like?
everyone at the Dome watching football?
I don't know, but it was very odd to us, and I had wondered how much of that was because of the freeway being there. And that might be another reason why SU is in support of tearing down the freeway. So, I mentioned so my background is in urban planning. I'm a graduate of Morgan State University in Baltimore. And a big emphasis of Morgan and other universities and the amenities that they're planning is, especially I think colleges are starting to realize that, they're at the peak and their population is going to drop, right? So rather than provide more providing all these amenities on campus, be like, oh, well, what if we had the amenities right next to campus, but are like privately owned? Like a cute little, there's, recent construction. It's a, public-private thing next to Morgan. Or you've got, grocery store and shops and, like this sort of entertainment-y district that, is for the surrounding community as well as the university, right? So it just gets me thinking about Syracuse. I'm wondering if that is one of the university's goals. Is it's like, oh, if we don't have the freeway, then our students can take advantage of downtown and in a better way, and be able to we can point to look at all the entertainment options in downtown Syracuse, or all the cool things you can do right off campus.
I do think that there is a part of Syracuse University that looks at this, that looks at downtown Syracuse as the next big college town. And that they, however they're coming up with this, I don't know, but they see the freeway removal as sort of the first step to really transforming the city into a world-class college town. And it does kind of go back to what I was saying before about the homeless situation and the drug situation and the crime situation and all that. I think that they feel like this freeway is a hindrance to their overall vision, not just for themselves, but also for what the city could be with them as a partner.
And that's huge when it comes to universities and marketing and trying to get prospective students in, particularly prospective students that may come from more rural and suburban backgrounds that have this, fear of, city life. If they have... if they can point to, look how nice the neighborhood right next to campus is, it increases their enrollment.
Well, I mean, I was one of those students too, not so long ago.
Well,
I grew up in a white suburban community, and I can tell you that, given my upbringing, I would have been scared to death of going to college in a city.
I was told flat out I wasn't even allowed to look at schools within a city because my parents were so scared of cities.
And that's a really unfortunate, tragic example of how stereotypes persist over time.
Yeah.
Like these, cities get those stereotypes because of certain things, and even though conditions on the ground change, the stereotypes remain.
Yeah.
Rainy, we gotta.
Whereas I, went to a college in a small city, small town, and but I was from Smithtown is probably the most segregated suburb in America.
Even today, I would say.
Yeah. I went to Oswego, which is in a small city.
Yeah.
Which is in decline, but.
But Oswego to you must have still been a world away from Smithtown.
Yeah. I had a professor who was once the mayor of Oswego for one of my classes.
Very cool.
And he was saying things. He was the mayor during the 80s, and I think one of the things he was saying, during what they were trying to do to promote Oswego was to basically tell people in Syracuse, hey, Syracuse, we have your harbor. Because Oswego's right on Lake Ontario. I'm reading through some of the comments on this, and we do have a local DM Rothex, which you may know him from AARoads as Rothman.
Yeah, he's around.
And he actually lives in Syracuse and works in Syracuse. So he's actually basically saying basically where the SU students are, and it's actually basically they go to Marshall or Westcott, which is basically not downtown. It's kind of in its own bubble next to campus. That's where they go now. But basically Community Grid opens up, and he's actually provided a lot of good commentary in the live chat. So I do want to thank him for basically contributing the chat and basically giving a lot of local insight. We should go to Gannon's Isle for ice cream sometime.
That's a place I haven't been to.
I have
haven't
not
made
been
it
there
yet.
either. He talks about it on Facebook.
Oh, okay. Well,
So I've been friends
all
with him on Facebook. But yeah, that's the thing is it basically with like the community grid option, like places where people go, that gives the opportunity for things to shift around.
So, how should we wrap this up? I mean, folks can chime in with their questions and comments in the chat below for the next. Well, we'll stick around for another half hour or so because we still got some videos to watch. But
yeah, we actually need to
as far as
virtually
the
drive the.
yes, we do. But as far as wrapping up the discussion, did we hit on everything we wanted to hit on? I mean, I think Laura did a good job of outlining sort of how the existing 81 came to be, and the price that the city paid for it. I think we've hit on all of the important points as far as the community grid. Let me tell you something, folks. If you're interested in researching the community grid proposal and this whole project, there are a lot of different great sources out there. And again, all we're trying to do tonight is give folks an overview. So, there's no shortage of interesting websites. You can go to the project websites for the community grid as well. They can give you a little bit more detail than we just did. But I don't know. I think we did a pretty good job of giving folks basically just kind of what's going on and what our personal opinions are on things. So, did any of you have anything else that you wanted to add? And then I know that Doug and Laura have really had a lot to say, and I really appreciate them being here tonight to be a part of this.
Especially since I was supposed to be in Syracuse.
Yeah, I'm sorry, bro.
Well,
I hope this was more entertaining for you than what you would have been doing.
I wouldn't watch a hockey game. That would be more entertaining.
Well, all right. Well,
I'm sorry, it's true.
I can owe you tickets to a Syracuse Crunch game. How's that sound?
Yeah, but we made plans first before my brother chimed in, so.
Yeah, well, that's true. That's his fault then.
Yeah.
All right, whatever.
Sucks for him. You got to see me tomorrow.
I might address some more stuff. These videos, once they are done going live, they become open to the public for viewing after the fact. And I'm sure that a lot of people who weren't able to catch parts or all of this show tonight will watch it after the fact. And I can't wait to see the comments section for this video in the days after it goes public. But I might address some of those comments next week. You can join me for my year in review extravaganza, which right now is supposed to happen next Saturday. I don't know if I'm actually going to do it next Saturday. I still have to actually think about that. I want to talk to some of you guys off the air about that, actually. But right now it's penciled in to happen on Christmas Eve. We'll go through the year 2022 from my YouTube channel's perspective, and we'll talk about the travels that I took around the country and some of the content that was introduced to the channel this year, and some of the stuff that you can look forward to in 2023.
And speaking of, basically your videos becoming public, years after the fact, sometimes they might wind up in an article in Gribble Nation.
Hint, hint.
And I would also love feedback too. This is the first time we've had Rainey on an episode in a while. I'd love to, hear. Were there parts that, she was maybe a little too loud or could have participated differently. I'd love feedback on that as well.
Yep. And in the meanwhile, I'll be eating these delicious cranberry chocolate chip cookies I baked.
And you should all be here because they are amazing.
They really are.
Yeah, we wish that Doug had made enough for everybody who was watching tonight because
I made enough for everyone on the panel.
Yeah, he made enough for everyone to show up.
I even made gluten-free cookies as well.
Well, because I was asking people, there are several of us. We're going to watch a video now of I-81 north through Syracuse, which includes the existing alignment. Because I was saying to people when they showed up, we went live and said, these two people were showing up. People were showing up like during the day, and I'm like, what are you guys want for dinner? Never knew they were moving. And then Doug comes in with this entire chocolate chips cranberry. Just like people like, well, I want cranberry. I'm sorry, cranberry. as soon as he brings in this mountain of cookies, everybody's like, oh my god, what cookies? So,
I'll take it. I think.
well, you can well, so there are sandwich bags, people, so you can take some with you. Well, you know what you should do? You should probably go so that you're not left with nothing. But don't think about that. Okay, well that's up to you. There you go.
So you get all of the fun benefits. Yeah, basically
Do
not.
they stay crunchy or do you not put pretzels in them?
Do not put pretzels. Basically, it's usually a regular trail mix bag, like I did like dried cranberries.
Oh, my child
I
loves
just bought them
pretzels.
from Hannaford. And this will have like the M&Ms, it'll have the peanuts, the raisins, whatever else comes in trail mix.
That sounds amazing.
I actually, one of the nice things about living with
I
Kelly
forgot to
is
mute the
I
sound
have
of
so
the
little
computer.
self-control skills, I make her hide them in a location that I don't know about.
That's the good thing about living on my own. If I don't buy them, they're not there and I can't eat
Well, that's the
them.
problem is, yeah. Well, I do that. Or,
Yeah, can I have my drink?
that's what I did when I lived by myself. Then when she moved in, she started importing cookies and things like that. I was like,
Buy
this,
her a safe.
I was like, well, that's, yeah, I mean, she has hidden them away somewhere that I don't feel
Cookie
comfortable looking
exchange
at.
at Corcos next Christmas. Sorry, I just volunteered.
Because I will pound through a couple dozen cookies in a day.
Yeah.
Yeah. You need a Christmas present for her, buy her a safe and don't know the combo and then
Exactly.
keep
Yep.
everything in there. And she's gonna come home and you're gonna be like a ravaged bear trying to get it today.
Yeah.
No, I just say have a cookie exchange.
Yeah.
Could do that, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be fine. But yeah.
So I think that most people are familiar with the existing 81 through Syracuse. Maybe you're not.
I've never driven the.
Well, this is it. So take notes, young man. So this is
You
this
should
is.
probably do
Rainey
it
has not been on it
It's on
yet.
my list.
Rainey has not been on it yet. Well, she's got 3 years to do it, young lady.
She'll get there. We'll get her there.
All
I was
right.
just thinking
We'll
we'd
probably-
do it on the way back from Baltimore.
We probably-
or where was it?
You know what I'm thinking? We probably need to do it right before it closes so that she can remember it.
And then do it again when the new one opens.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, well,
Yeah.
could do that.
I could drive this tomorrow.
You might as well while you're there, right?
Yeah, well,
Yeah, well,
I have to look at the forecast. What I usually do is if I go during the day, I actually like taking 20 across instead of the Thruway. I usually take the Thruway if I'm trying to make time, but if I leave early enough on in the morning tomorrow,
It's like,
I take 20 to Casanova and then cut up 92 towards Manlius and DeWitt.
nice.
And I need the contractor's name because I want to run it after they close up the traffic before they demolish it.
Ooh.
I hope they do some sort of like public,
They won't. They never
access
do.
thing. Well, not in New York State they don't,
Why
No.
not?
but
Yeah.
other more fun parts of the country they do.
They
But
did one on the Viaduct in Seattle.
I thought they did one in the
Yeah,
Alaskan Way,
yeah,
didn't they?
yeah.
A lot of the bigger bridges have a bridge day, so one day a year they'll close the bridge and have them open.
Bay Bridge Run
Yeah.
in Maryland.
But the New River Gorge I know does a bridge day. I know the Mackinac Island Bridge does a bridge day. These are all on my list of places I will go.
The thing is with the Alaskan Way Viaduct, it also provided probably one of the best views around Seattle for
Oh,
the
it's
for the common man.
Absolutely. It
Common
was
woman.
gorgeous. Yep.
Oh yeah.
What about for the
And I-
non-common people?
The common people. Do whatever common people do. I want to do.
I mean, this is a
common
pretty
people
crappy
do.
facility as I'm looking at it.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, not even just the pavement condition, it's just, yeah.
it's substandard.
Yeah.
And the thing is, like if you're taking like 690,
Yeah.
there's no direct connection to 81 north from 690 east.
Oh, interesting.
You'd have to like
Oh, I
go to
guess
like
'cause,
Bear
yeah,
Street,
yeah.
and then it basically gets you up towards Carousel.
Oh, I guess
that's
that,
the other side.
I guess that wouldn't be a movement you would make all that
And
often, would
also-
it? Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
And also, if you take the southbound, there's a very short section where it's a single lane.
I said it's not it's shoehorned in there. It's not.
Yeah, this
That was never really standard.
You can tell the city wasn't built for this. They just
No.
found some extra grass and stuff that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this 81 video that we're watching was filmed in October of 2022. Most of the pictures that I took for this presentation were taken this past year.
Cool.
The vast majority of the video we're going to watch was also from roughly around that time also. Because I was coming to and from Buffalo as part of... What are you doing over there?
Oh, she's trying to get the flag.
Which one does she want?
The Canada flag.
Well, because I was coming to and from Buffalo because somebody is hosting Road Meet there next July, so, you know, I had to get some scouting out of the way.
Yep.
Anyway, what are you doing over here?
I've got that on my calendar.
Yep.
Right.
I
already have that.
hosted the first meet in Buffalo.
Nice.
And the second one.
I have close New York 370.
Yep.
That's the only.
Which number meet is this for Buffalo? Is this the third or
Fourth.
Fourth.
It'll be the
Adam Moss hosted one as well.
I still think you should have scheduled a cross border during the beach tour. That would have been fun.
Well,
Fun for some people.
that would have been interesting, I'll say that.
I think you should have had the balls to pull that off. That would have been hilarious. But that's okay.
I'm still voting for the next day, taking the Maid of the Mist
Yeah.
from New York, because then you get to cross into Canada without having to go through customs.
So that's nice.
Well, if you walk across the Rainbow Bridge, there's like maybe it's higher now, but it's like 50 cents.
It was $1 when I did it in 2018, but you do have to go through customs on both sides too.
Yeah.
Oh, you have to
Yeah,
pay
you
a
do.
toll if you're a pedestrian.
Yeah, you have to pay a toll.
Yeah, you do.
And it's got to be in cash. At least when I did it in 2018.
Do they take U.S. cash or Canada cash?
I think
I
it's
think
both.
I had U.S. cash and they took it, but you pay the toll on the Canada side because you have to pay to get out of this country.
Gotcha.
And
Because why would anyone pay to go enter the U.S.?
No idea.
That's true.
But they kind of look
It's like New Jersey. Why would anyone pay to enter New Jersey?
I mean, honestly, that would be the best
Exactly.
way to do the meat tour is to, if you did a cross-border meat tour, do it at the Rainbow Bridge, have everybody not driving walk across the border, and then just pick everybody. Everybody just says, "Oh, we're going to go see the falls. We're going to go see
Yeah,
the falls."
because and yeah, that's what you go. It's like going kind of like, oh, I'd like to. Yeah, basically, oh, you just let it go to Niagara. If you're in Niagara Falls, you even want to drive around for a couple hours. The best thing to tell customs, oh, I'm just going to go see the falls for a couple hours.
No, when I did that in April of last year, I drove over the Rainbow Bridge and said I want to go see the falls, and I got secondary. So, that's they acted like I was a crazy person. Though that was still when you needed to get a COVID test to get into Canada.
That
So
might
maybe
be
they
part of
thought
it,
that
yeah.
was like, well, nobody's doing this right now.
But yeah, you'd always like that was always my. Oh, I'm going to see the falls. But yeah, I think the last time I went to.
and sparkly.
Actually, no. It wasn't the last time I went to Niagara Falls. One of the last times I went to Niagara Falls, that's my day. I walked across, and you know, basically, I spent 4th of July in Canada.
I support that. I did that for like
For
4 straight years.
I was only there for about an hour, and I came back with a. I had to declare a sunburn on my way back.
Oh, jeez.
I burn easily.
You got a sunburn in Canada.
That
Oh,
takes talent.
Yeah.
That's not what Canada's known
Yeah,
for.
yeah.
I want to hear that story.
I burn easy. So
He was burned really easy.
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, frostbite would be more of a community thing.
That I would expect.
Yeah, that would be fair.
In July, mind you.
Yep. I mean, I have went to Canada in winter a few times.
I went in March. I walked across the Rainbow Bridge, and it was actually really icy and kind of scary. I thought I was going to fall in.
Yeah, the last time I drove across and stayed in Niagara Falls, Ontario, I actually saw the Scotties, which is the Canadian Women's Curling
Oh,
Championship.
nice.
Hey,
I
there you
saw that in
go.
2017. It's over in St. Catharines, but I stayed at I think it was a Hojo in Niagara Falls, and it had a off-colored bathtub. It had a red, like the room was like normal color, but the bathtub was like bright red.
Nice. That's how. Well, somebody was probably murdered in there, and then they just
Probably.
Time the bathtub red to cover
But I
up the
think I
blood.
paid like 50. I think I paid $50 Canadian. for
Yeah,
it.
so somebody was definitely
It
murdered
was
in that
in
bathtub.
February. I'm
That's
like,
what
who's
they
gonna
say,
go to
so-
Niagara Falls in February? anyways?
By the way, Carlos made an interesting observation about the new light poles on
Oh, yeah.
690 out in East Syracuse. I agree. I love that a little taste of Delaware has come to East Syracuse.
Well, the part of like this part of 690 that you see here, they actually they actually did a full like reconstruction of it a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that might be a matter of Delaware coming to Syracuse.
I love, I'm always in favor of as someone who was born in Wilmington and who has still family living in Wilmington. I'm all in favor of a little taste of Delaware coming to the roads of upstate New York. It reminds me of Wilmington, seeing those light poles there. Yeah. Yeah, but I'm a road enthusiast. I pick up on weird shit like that.
Well, right.
So it's like.
Well,
But it's
yeah.
a good factory.
Well, Delaware.
That's true. That's
Standardized
true.
state.
Well, there's your railroad platform with flags and fake people.
That's right. And they deck those people out based on the holiday and the season and all that stuff. Yeah, they put like Christmas decor, Christmas lights on them, and they do all that stuff.
I see this out, basically, in Scarry County, basically near the cabin, Stamford, which is in Delaware County. Like people will they'll get like mannequins and they'll dress them up and put them in front of their house. In Stamford, New York, that is. There's this one property. It's right on Route 10, and they have people and mannequins on snowmobiles in the summer.
Nice.
Well, there you go.
There's a house near me with a Halloween skeleton that just sits on their front porch all year, and they change the costume depending on the time of year.
And yes, I did spend Canada Day in the U.S. that year because I had to work.
Of course you did. Yeah.
I for 3 or 4 years in a row, I did that on purpose. I'd go to Canada for the 4th of July, but not for Canada Day, just to avoid the festivities.
Well,
You-
but I bet the festivities would be fun.
I
But I have to
No,
say,
I'm not a 4th of July person. I'm not a Canada.
I
person,
love the
so
4th of July. So, oh my god, so my birthday is June 30th. And so as a result, I grew up with my grandmother making, the strawberry shortcake with the shortcake and then the strawberries and whipped cream for the stripes and blueberry for the stars, like the American flag cake. And then she put candles in it. And we'd sing happy birthday to that.
So,
I love 4th of July because my birthday is in it and it's great.
my birthday.
And Canada Day is the day after, so I've always wanted to go to see what it's like.
My
There you go.
birthday is the week before Halloween, so I'd have a cake that looked like a ghost for my birthday.
That's pretty cool. My parents never got me a cake, so
Yeah.
I don't like anything.
I guess my mother found.
Probably on sale.
Yeah, she probably found. No, she had the cake molds. So she probably found the cake mold on sale.
Yeah.
Nice.
And since I have a twin brother, that was a cake for 2 of us. My brother gets nostalgia, and my sister-in-law now bakes in ghost cakes for his
Did
birthday.
you find the same mold, or is it a slightly different one?
She's incredibly entertaining on that air conditioner.
My mother, I'm sure, threw that mold away.
They don't last all that
Oh,
long.
yeah.
It lasted most of my childhood. So it lasted during the 80s and into the 90s.
Yeah.
So I've been known to go to Mexico over Halloween to avoid Halloween.
Yeah.
Oh, but Halloween's so much
I don't
fun!
like that.
You get to dress up!
Halloween this year, I
Yeah.
spent the entirety of Halloween in airports,
Beautiful.
and just saying, TSA actually had candy all over the airport, so I literally went trick-or-treating gate to gate and then got on my plane and went home. It was awesome.
That's pretty
That's
cool.
amazing.
I
I do
might
that.
start flying
I was just
every
saying, I
year.
kind of want to fly Halloween.
So y'all,
I
my
might
nep-
start flying every year.
my nephew is 4, and guess what he was for Halloween this year?
An airplane?
He was a traffic light!
Oh.
Oh, there are pictures of
also,
that, right?
all of
Yes!
the online people and
My-
the workers were in costume,
My nephew
including the TSA
is a road
agents. It was
geek.
amazing.
That's cool. I like that.
Yeah.
We have a
I
new
will spend
budding road geek.
Memorial Day
A new Bianca
weekend
road
in
geek,
Canada.
yep.
That's right.
I've done that a few times because it's a regular weekend there,
Yep.
and I get an extra day to putz around in Canada.
There you go.
It's
Yeah,
not that I'm
that's
trying to avoid
works for
Memorial
me.
Day.
No.
It's because I have this extra day to
yeah.
go places.
So I've been known to go to Canada over President's Day for the same weekend, same reason. It's a nice weekend to be.
So you can avoid
Something, or
so you can avoid sales at the furniture store.
Why don't you sit down and join us?
I was eating.
Oh,
eating cookies.
I was.
Yes!
Good cookies.
they are good.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like I'm gonna have to start baking cookies for road meets now, which I don't want to do.
Don't feel obligated. But
Yeah,
wait,
don't feel obligated.
That being said, we are very grateful
Just-
anytime you make it.
We just
Just,
don't know unless you have it.
Just bake cookies for us, not the other attendees.
Yeah.
We're now an exclusive club.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
the thing is now is I have a I now
Put
have a
my car.
reputation.
Yeah. Well, that'll give some other people on the AARoads forum something to complain
Well,
about.
that
It
you
makes
see
someone
that
show up.
Crown
Yeah.
Plaza there. That used to be a Sheraton. There used to be another hotel.
Yeah.
It was a Marriott at one point, but yeah, that's like the big hotel. I always wanted to stay in that hotel.
Hey.
Never had a
Yeah,
chance.
well, you
All I
can't,
know
like...
is I'm definitely contacting the engineer because I really want to ride my bike on this after they close it. It would be so much
It
fun.
would be cool if they did, like, a community day thing
Yeah.
where they, like, shut this down to
It's
all
like,
traffic
like a
and...
day before construction starts.
Yeah, like on the weekend before they start,
Yeah.
you know?
You should
This would be so much fun to do end to end and then back to my car. First
Yeah.
enter my car.
I
you
mean,
should
I-
reach out to Rothman. He
I would
works
make
for,
the 3-hour
PhD
drive
services.
from here to do it. That's for sure.
I'd make the 6-hour drive to do it.
I make the, I guess,
I mean, I took a trip up here just to drive 690 when the signals were all up.
During the State Fair, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
In
don't-
fact, it was the last year that they had them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have pictures of that floating around.
I even got stuck on mainline 690 at red light.
There you
And,
go, yeah.
You have a lot of signs that are folded out for the State Fair that are button copied.
oh, did
Yes, indeed they
They?
do.
Oh, they still
Yeah,
there?
yeah. And those are still...
Well, I mean, they
Yeah.
they don't use them all the time, so they don't need to replace them that
That's
often.
awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe we'll go to the...
We didn't really talk much about this during the PowerPoint, but the Syracuse also kind of sort of had plans for an inner loop. The West Street Arterial was to form the west leg of it, and there was supposed to be a south leg involving the one-way pair of, I think, Adams and Harrison.
Yeah.
Most of the West Street Arterial was built as planned, and so that forms... So if you combine
All
that
these
with...
winter long.
Yeah, so if you combine West Street with 690 and 81, you sort of have 3/4 of the loop,
Yeah.
and then they just never got around to upgrading
And
the
I
one-way
think
pair on the south
part
side to
of
complete.
The redeveloping, basically with the community grid, I think they had some plans, at least at the north end of West Street, to do something. So
Yeah.
I will provide virtual cookies to everyone.
Yeah.
That's better. Oh, and yeah, the one thing.
Accept all cookies.
The one thing we didn't touch on in Syracuse, that is the other big draw for the road enthusiast community, the upside down traffic light.
Oh.
Everybody loves being upside down curve. Like,
Yeah, where is that?
It is on the west side of Syracuse. It's near Coleman's, which is a nice Irish restaurant, by the way.
what
Okay.
makes it upside down?
Well, the green is on top.
Oh, it's
that would be
inverted.
upside down.
Okay. That is literally upside down. Yeah.
And the legend behind that is that it used to be red on top, green on bottom, but it was an Irish neighborhood. So, red equals British, so the British suck. So, they would throw rocks at the red light. They would replace it, and then after a while, they said, screw this. We'll just keep the green on top. Because
like it.
To keep it out of
we're
reach.
done with vandalism.
I love it.
There's even a statue denoting this.
Yes, and they have, it's right next to the traffic light. There's a statue, and it's to honor the
People
Irish
throw rocks
residents
at
in the
those
neighborhood,
stoplights. Awesome.
Yeah.
I love it.
There is an
There's a kid
article.
with rock in hand, yes.
I love it.
Yeah, there is an article in Gribble Nation about the upside down traffic light.
I didn't know that you did a blog article about that.
Did this a number of years back.
Oh, okay.
I think I actually basically brought it in from the old GribbleNation.net site because I did import a few articles I wrote over to the GribbleNation.org when we decided to basically revamp Gribble Nation as a blog site, which my personal opinion is that it's that format is miles better than the old website because there's a lot less maintenance involved.
Yeah.
because you're using a platform which basically they'll build in any changes with time.
Yeah.
As far as like basically changes in technology or things like that, or so
Yeah.
that's just my personal opinion on web development of Dribble Nation.
Well, you've got quite the story as far as your site's initial creation and then the evolution over the years and then what it's turned into recently. So, yeah.
We had a podcast episode about that a couple years back as well. Like Adam Prince and I had talked about that. But yeah, there's and I do have a lot more material to add. I just like to basically I do a lot of things outside of the hobby as well. I do a lot of hiking, so that cuts into a lot of my weekend time, especially when the weather is nice, like what you see on this video right now.
Yeah, it was a nice day in late October when I was in town for this.
I was there in October 22nd this year, that weekend.
Yeah, I think this was like the week after that or something like that. Yeah.
Well, I had to go. My mother was in town, so I had to go to Syracuse for my birthday. And then
Is she living now in that area?
in Oregon. She's still in Oregon.
Oh, she still is.
She has put a deposit for a senior apartment in Panelist. I don't know when she's moving. She's 76 now, but she will probably take her time to move to New York. I don't think she wants to leave Oregon, but none of my siblings or I are able to leave New York.
Yeah, that's part of it, right? Yeah.
That's if one of us was able to go to Oregon, I don't think she'd be leaving.
That's fair.
Yeah, well.
Yeah, but that's but of course you'd figure with myself and having a twin brother we would be able to figure out where to go to dinner. No, we had to go to a place for our birthday dinner that my mother approved. The Greek, the Mediterranean and Greek food at King David's was.
Oh wait, it was your birthday.
It was my birthday, and my twin brother and I had to pick a place that my mother would approve.
Well, did she buy?
That's what happens in the Kerr family.
Did she buy?
that's the hierarchy.
Well, whatever, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But so that's but the food was good at least.
That's good. That's the most important part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So even on the on the Roadway Whiz, you even get to learn about Kerr family politics.
Yes, we're learning about family history here, and
Yes.
you can join us in January for our family lineage webinar series.
Really?
Before
Some
this,
people might find that more interesting. I don't know.
That wouldn't be bad.
before we start tonight's episode, I was touching on the hoop skirt incident, which which if you Google it, it goes to a PDF for some religious newsletter, but apparently my ancestors followed this priest from Ohio to Minnesota and then to Oregon, and the priest apparently did not like hoop skirts, and this was like during the 1860s, so like whacked the parishioners who were wearing hoop skirts with a hickory stick.
In all fairness, it can't hurt that much to be hit with a hickory stick and a hoop skirt, because they do kind of prevent anything from touching you.
Well, that's good.
Well, that is a fair point that she brings up. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it might even felt good.
And then with the corset and everything, you really can't feel anything that's going on when
They
you're in the
wouldn't hurt that much. Ooh, smack me again.
It doesn't the corset like move your organs around.
They weren't actually worn very tight. The point of a historical corset was that the dresses weighed so much. If you didn't have something on, it would be pulling on your skin and it hurt. So historically, all those corsets really would do is just be something for the fabric to pull on, so it didn't hurt. Most of the movies way dramatize it way more than is historically accurate.
See all you can learn on an episode of the Roadway Whiz.
This has me wondering though if there weren't like ulterior motives for people following this pastor all the way to Oregon.
What were they wearing?
You know,
Well, right? Like, I mean, maybe the women were like, let's follow this guy because
He's not making us
Yeah.
yeah, right.
And I think they actually moved his body from after he died from like one location to like exhumed him and buried him in another place.
Oh.
Did they put him in a hoop skirt when they buried him?
I don't think so, but maybe.
we need to do another site investigation to discover this. You know,
Not to
figure
go
it
all
out,
morbid,
you know.
but I think one way you know you've like lived an important life and were valuable people is if you get exhumed at some point,
That is true.
right? Like
That or maybe your graveyard just got eminent domain
Right,
and now
yeah.
you gotta go get buried
Right,
elsewhere
well,
so you can go to
that's
highway.
I mean, I
Or if
think,
you're Mormon, they what's it? I want to say not baptize the dead. Maybe they do baptize the dead. They
I
convert
think there
the
is
dead to
such a
Mormonism.
thing.
That's
Yeah.
what it is.
Yeah.
well, I don't want to be converted after I die. I'll be hanging out in hell. I'm not gonna like.
And that's why,
I guess that's why they're.
and that's why there's so much genealogy records kept in Salt Lake City.
Yeah.
I'll meet you by the biggest volcano. That's where I'm gonna, head first when I get to hell.
Sounds
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'll hang out. Yeah.
All right, I've got one more video to play tonight, and we're gonna. This video will take us to the Adams Street exit 18. It'll take us down the existing Almond Street arterial, just to kind of get a look at the viaduct from the underside
Yeah.
before we close up shop tonight. So we still have a few more minutes for questions if anybody has anything they want us to address.
And I will say, if I ever wrote a screenplay for a movie, it would be about the hoop skirt incident. What would you write a screenplay about?
Well, when you write your screenplay, stop by. I got all the history about hoop skirts in the 1860s.
She's got all the legit props
I
too.
do, yeah, I do have authentic hoop skirts from the 1860s. I do some Civil War reenactment on the side.
Are you a Confederate or a Union usually?
In a hoop skirt, we are portraying ladies in the time.
Are you married to a Confederate or a Union?
Or I'm not.
Answer his question, damn it!
No, I portray a single woman so I can go to the balls and dance with everybody. I need my dance card filled
That's
out.
A spinster!
Yes, I portray
Okay.
a spinster lady from the 1860s.
Fair
Corca.
enough.
She goes to the party and she dances with balls. Like, you know, is that
Yeah, that's, well,
is that a good enough answer
And
for
in all
you?
fairness, sometimes I dance with the other ladies because there's usually a significant ratio issue at the balls.
Oh, that doesn't surprise me at all.
Wait, the balls?
In modern
Oh.
times. Historically, that would not have been okay. For the most part. Post-Civil War, there actually
Right.
was some of that happened, just because so many of the men were dead or injured after the Civil War.
Yeah.
They actually came up with this one, I don't remember the name of the dance, but there is one dance that came out shortly after the Civil War that's actually 2 ladies for every man. And it's a square dance, and it's just because there were so many more ladies because the men were all dead from the battles.
So
I need to go to
so
one
like
of these
dudes
balls.
don't go to
That's
these
what
balls.
I'm
Yeah,
saying.
something
I need
like
to, yeah.
yeah. I mean, like
Yeah,
if I were
Me too.
engaged, I would be right. Like,
There's a regimental in February in Ohio if I go to. I go to 1 or 2 in Gettysburg in November every year.
Yeah, that's the one that I'm most familiar with.
Alex
yeah.
went with me last year.
You got him to go, and
I got
I'm really proud of you for doing
I got
that.
him to go. I was
Yeah,
shocked.
I'm
but
surprised that he won.
He was a
But
pretty good dancer too.
alright.
I believe it.
I would do square dance. There was a square dance night we'd have in like elementary school.
Well, do we
Yeah,
want
I
to?
can square dance.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
Civil War
that's-
dancing's not hard. You
No,
get
you-
there, and each dance they explain to you, and then you practice it a couple times, and then you dance. And if you're really struggling, one of the instructors will stand by your quadrille the entire dance and help you out.
Well, that's
Like, they
embarrassing.
make them
but,
Speaking of demonstrations of things that happened in the 19th century, I went to Hermitage, which is Andrew Jackson's home
Yeah,
just
yeah.
outside Nashville.
Speaking of pickers,
They had a demonstration on the art of the duel.
Oh. Well,
So you learn all about like how they would come to duels, like how everyone, like how a duel started. Basically, you'd have your seconds, which basically like you're kind of like your intermediaries because the people who were actually going to duel didn't want to talk to each other, things like that. That was interesting.
And wouldn't the seconds have to step in if the first guy ran away and hid in the middle of the night?
Yeah, more or less. Because people are wusses.
I mean, you don't really want somebody shooting at you. Like,
Yeah, I mean, how often did duels actually happen?
Yeah,
I
dude,
feel like
dude,
they
at-
happen far less frequently.
this
Yeah,
Gettysburg
they usually
thing.
settled their differences,
Right.
or it came to a an agreement at least, basically before, basically a duel actually happened.
Which makes
Yeah,
sense.
at this Gettysburg event, were people bringing muskets and shooting each other, or not?
Bayonets.
So not in November when this event is, because the event I go to is the anniversary of the Gettysburg Address. So
Right,
there's not
yeah.
a ton of reenactment going on because that's not when the battle was.
Right.
But if you go the first weekend of July and actually do a second one the last weekend of June, there's 2 different companies that put on reenactments. There
They do,
are
yeah.
full out reenactments of the entire 3 days of Gettysburg with bayonets and muskets and, they don't actually shoot each other, but
They're
they've got black
shootable.
powder and they are actually shooting.
They're shooting blanks.
They're shooting blanks, yeah.
Right.
But they're actually 2 weekends in a row down there. They do a full scale reenactment of the entire
Yeah,
battle.
that's pretty cool.
Which would also be my birthday weekend.
Absolutely.
I have not gone to either one. I've heard the one in June is better. Even though it's not on the true dates of the battle, I've been told that the guy who puts on the June one does a better job.
Nice.
Is the guy that does the other one old and crotchety and his
I
name?
don't know. This is just, I have friends that go to those reenactments. This is what I've been told.
Gotcha.
I have not gone. I cannot give you a personal view of either one. I will go at some point to one of them.
Okay.
I think that's something that we should do at some point. It's,
Do-si-do.
well,
How are the Gettysburg guys?
Gettysburg for a reenactment would be pretty cool. I think.
Yeah. The Remembrance Days are really, they do like a parade through the city. They do.
Yeah, that's always been a big thing there too.
Yeah, they have
Remembrance
ghost tours.
Days, I go every year. It's a very fun weekend.
Do you really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Not only they have the battlefields and all this, they have ghost tours.
We did one this
Well, that too.
year.
Yeah.
And it was
I did.
very fascinating. It was like it was actually like they gave you a lot of really interesting history. Like you go to an area and they give you the history of this whole area, and then they tell you where to go look for the ghosts.
And if you like roads, there's covered bridges in the area.
If you go on my Instagram page, Selfies with a Bridge, I do have a picture of the Sachs Covered Bridge, which is a haunted bridge in Gettysburg, and the John Eisenhower Bridge, which is a truss bridge also in Gettysburg, right near there.
See, Doug, you gotta get to work, man. You got some catching up to do here.
Yeah.
Erica's got you covered, though.
I got you
If
covered.
you wanna. Well, as our 3-year-old friend comes back from her tour of Canada with the Canadian flags.
And Quebec flags.
Yeah.
Quebec is in Canada.
Well, I mean, depends on who you ask.
That's a
Well,
good
they
point,
have
yeah.
their own national capital and their own national park, which provincial park. Basically, that's what they call their provincial. Quebec City is what they call their national capital. They go provincial capital. I just think it's how they just the translation of it.
I also recently learned, this might be, American school systems failing you, but did you guys know Hawaii still actually has a royal family and still has royalty?
Oh yeah. There's still the Royal Palace and all that stuff.
Yeah.
In
I did
Honolulu.
not-
I didn't know they were still like.
I did
Yeah.
not know this until recently.
I mean, they're
No,
completely
still king and queens
symbolic,
and
yeah.
princes.
They're completely ceremonial and all that, just like the British royals are. But yeah, they still have a lineage and a royal family there. Yeah.
I did not realize that until recently.
Yeah.
Really, the school systems may have failed me a bit.
I think you can say that about a lot of school systems, frankly.
Oh, yeah.
Should we close up shop for the night?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we've said everything we wanted to say and a little bit more.
Yeah.
Say bye-bye, Rainy. Say bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I learned so much about hoop skirts today.
Yes.
Yeah, we did.
I hope this discussion about Syracuse was useful. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and thank you very much for watching. I'd
Yep.
like to thank once again our panel tonight, which consisted of the fine folks at Gribble Nation in the person of Doug Kerr. We had Erica, we had Corco of CorcoHighways.org, we had Bill, we had Laura of Mrs. MD Roads fame. Thank you very much for being here
Yep.
tonight.
And
if
of course,
you,
Rainy.
Yep.
And of course, our little 3-year-old who's going to be running my channel in about 20 years. or so.
And if you like what you saw, smash that subscribe button and join the Roadway Wars family.
I think that everyone who is watching at this point is a subscriber, but if you're not already a subscriber, why aren't you? Click that subscribe button, please.
Smash it.
It helps the channel out quite a bit, so please feel free to do that.
Bye-bye, mermaid.
Good night, sweetie, and good night to you all. We'll see you next week.
Good night. Bye-bye.